A woman steps off a train expecting a wedding ring. Instead, her groom takes one look at her body, spits at her feet, and rides away while the whole town laughs. But what that cruel rancher doesn't know is that his rejection just unleashed something far more dangerous than his pride. A Boston butcher's daughter with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. This is the story of how one woman's public humiliation became an entire town's reckoning. Stay until the end to see how this unfolds. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's story travels. The train's brakes screamed against the rails like something dying, metal shrieking into metal, and Clara Whitmore pressed 6 months of love letters against her chest, hard enough to feel her own heartbeat hammering through the paper. The blue cotton dress stuck to her skin in patches, sweat from the Texas heat, anxiety from what came next, hope from what she'd been promised in all that carefully written ink. Through the smudged window, Dust Hollow looked exactly like Elias had described it. A scatter of sun-bleached buildings thrown across the prairie like dice someone had given up on. The kind of town that existed because the railroad needed somewhere to stop, not because anyone particularly wanted to live there. But Clara didn't care about the town. She cared about the man who'd written to her every week for half a year, whose letters had made Boston feel like a cage she was finally escaping. The conductor's hand appeared at her elbow as she stood, and she jerked away harder than she meant to. "I'm fine," she said, though her legs were shaking and her palms were damp against the leather handle of her suitcase. She'd been fine her whole life, fine when her father drank away the butcher shop, fine when her mother died leaving her to raise 3 brothers, fine when those same brothers married and suddenly had no room for their spinster sister in houses she'd helped pay for. Fine was what you said when you had no other choice. The platform hit her like a wall of heat when she stepped down. Dry, relentless, nothing like the humid Massachusetts summers that at least had the decency to break with thunderstorms. This heat just sat on everything, patient and mean. Clara's hair was already escaping its pins, dark strands curling against her neck in a way that would have mortified her mother. But her mother was 6 years dead, and Clara was 28 years old, and this was supposed to be the day everything changed. She scanned the crowd gathering on the platform. Not many, maybe 20 people, which was probably half the town based on what Elias had written. Her eyes caught on a tall man near the station house, dark hair under a good hat, shoulders that looked right for ranch work. He was staring directly at her. Clara's heart did something complicated in her chest. She smoothed her dress with one hand, suddenly aware of every wrinkle, every place the fabric pulled tight. The letters had included a photograph, but photographs lied in kind ways. She'd sent her best one, taken 3 years ago before her father's final bender, before the nights of stretching soup and mending clothes until her fingers bled. The man walked toward her. Not rushed, but not slow either. Deliberate. Clara set her suitcase down and pressed her hands together to stop them shaking. "Elias," she said when he was close enough. He didn't answer, just looked at her, a long, cold sweep from her face down to her scuffed boots and back up again. His expression didn't change much, but something shifted behind his eyes, something that made Clara's stomach drop even before he spoke. "You're bigger than your picture." 4 words, flat as the prairie stretching behind him. Clara's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Around them, the platform had gone quiet in that particular way that meant everyone was listening while pretending not to. "The letters said," she started. "I know what the letters said." Elias cut her off. "I wrote them." "Then you know I came here to marry a man you've never met because Boston stopped wanting you?" His lip curled. "I can see why." The slap would have been worth it. Clara's hand actually twitched, fingers curling into her palm. But something in his stance told her he was waiting for exactly that. Some excuse to make this worse, to give the watching crowd an even better show. She forced her hand flat against her skirt instead. "You invited me here," Clara said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "You sent for me. That was before I saw you." Elias glanced past her at the train, like he was already calculating what it would cost to send her back. "You're not what I expected." A child's voice piped up from somewhere in the crowd. "Mama, why is she so fat?" "Hush," a woman's voice hissed, but the damage was done. Laughter rippled through the onlookers. Not loud, not mean exactly, but there. Undeniable. Clara's face went hot. She'd spent 6 months imagining this moment in 100 different ways. She'd pictured Elias being disappointed, maybe, or the town being rougher than she hoped. She'd even let herself imagine in her weakest moments that this might be a mistake. But she had never, not once, imagined being abandoned on a train platform like damaged freight. "I sold everything," Clara heard herself say, "to come here, to marry you. You promised—" "I don't make promises to women who lie about what they look like." Elias was already turning away, dismissing her. "There's a train back east tomorrow morning. I suggest you're on it." He walked toward a dark bay horse tied near the station house. The crowd parted for him automatically, small-town instinct giving way to local money. Because that's what Elias Reed was, Clara realized with a sick clarity. Not just handsome, not just a rancher. He was someone who mattered here, someone people stepped aside for. And she was nobody. A lie in a photograph. A joke people would tell. Clara's hands were shaking so hard the letters crumpled against her chest. 6 months of carefully written words about building a life together, about how lonely the ranch was, about needing a strong woman who wasn't afraid of hard work. Every single one of them was right there against her heart, and every single one was apparently worthless. Elias swung into the saddle with easy grace. He didn't look back. The porter who'd helped Clara with her trunk was studiously examining his shoes. A woman in a faded yellow dress pulled her daughter closer, like whatever failure Clara represented might be contagious. Even the station master had found urgent business inside his office. The only person still watching was an older Chinese woman standing near the station house steps, her face shadowed under a black silk umbrella that seemed ridiculously formal for a prairie train stop. She met Clara's eyes for a brief second, and Clara saw something there that wasn't pity. Recognition, maybe. Or warning. Then the woman turned and walked away too, and Clara was alone on the platform with her suitcase and her ruined dress and her crumpled letters and absolutely nowhere to go. The train behind her hissed steam like it was laughing. Clara had cried exactly 3 times in her adult life. Once when her mother died. Once when her father sold her grandmother's wedding ring for whiskey. Once when her youngest brother's wife made it clear there was no room in their new house for the sister who'd raised him. She did not cry on the platform in Dust Hollow, Texas. Instead, she picked up her suitcase, heavier than she remembered, packed with clothes she'd mended and remended for this journey, and walked toward the station house. Her legs felt distant, like they belonged to someone else, but they moved. The station master looked up when she entered, then immediately looked away. "I need a room," Clara said. "Boarding house is full." He didn't meet her eyes. "Try a—" "Is it actually full, or is it full of people who don't want to rent to the woman your town just humiliated?" His face reddened. "Look, miss, I don't know what you expected coming out here, but—" "A wedding." Clara's voice cracked on the word despite her best effort. "I expected a wedding. I expected the man who wrote to me every week for 6 months to be someone who kept his promises. Elias Reed is a respected man in this town. Elias Reed is a liar and a coward." The words came out louder than Clara intended. "And if being respected means treating women like livestock you can reject at the loading dock, then I don't think much of your town's respect." The station master's jaw worked. For a second, Clara thought he might actually say something human, but then his eyes shifted to someone behind her and whatever softness had been building disappeared. "You should take the morning train," he said quietly. "There's nothing for you here." Clara turned. A man in a black coat stood in the doorway. Older, soft around the middle, with the kind of face that was used to being listened to. The preacher, she guessed. Come to smooth over the awkwardness with Bible verses and gentle suggestions about knowing your place. "Miss Whitmore," he said, and his voice was exactly as unctuous as she'd expected. "I'm Pastor Hendricks. I wonder if we might speak outside." "So the station master doesn't have to watch you tell me to leave?" Clara kept her spine straight. "You can say it here." The pastor's smile didn't waver. "I understand you've had a difficult journey. These situations are always regrettable when expectations don't align with reality." "Whose reality?" Clara asked. "Mine or the one Elias Reed invented in his letters?" "Mr. Reed is a pillar of our community. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. There's been a lie." Clara's hands were shaking again, but she didn't try to hide it. "And your community watched him tell it and laughed." Something flickered across Pastor Hendricks' face. Irritation, maybe, at having his authority questioned. "Young lady, I think you'll find life considerably easier if you accept that some situations are simply not meant to be. The Lord works in mysterious— Don't! Clara's voice came out sharp enough to cut. Don't you dare tell me this is divine will. A cruel man made a cruel choice, and your entire town endorsed it. That's not mystery. That's just cowardice. The pastor's face went tight. I came here to offer you guidance and charity. The church can provide funds for your return journey. I don't want charity from people who think humiliation is entertainment. Clara picked up her suitcase. Her arms were already aching, but she'd be damned if she'd show it. And I'm not leaving. There's nothing for you here, Pastor Hendricks said, and now the kindness was completely gone from his voice. No prospects, no family, no future. You'll be destitute within a week. Then I'll be destitute here instead of Boston. Clara pushed past him toward the door. At least the weather's better. She made it 3 steps onto the platform before the reality of what she'd just said hit her. No money, no prospects, no plan whatsoever except a stubborn refusal to crawl back east and prove her brothers right about every single thing they'd said about her judgment. The sun was starting to lower, turning the sky the color of a bruise. Clara stood there with her suitcase and tried to figure out what the hell she was supposed to do next. You need somewhere to stay, Clara spun. The Chinese woman with the silk umbrella stood a few feet away, her expression unreadable. The station master said the boarding house is full, Clara managed. The boarding house is never full. The woman's English was perfect, barely accented. It's just full of people who don't want trouble with Elias Reed. And you do? Something that might have been a smile crossed the woman's face. I stopped worrying about Elias Reed's opinions a long time ago. I'm Madam Lin. I run a restaurant on the edge of town. You can work for room and board if you're not afraid of hard labor. Clara almost laughed. Lady, I've spent 10 years butchering hogs and making blood sausage. If you think restaurant work scares me, you don't know Boston. Good. Madam Lin started walking without waiting to see if Clara would follow. Because I don't need someone who breaks easily. This town has enough of those already. Clara grabbed her suitcase and hurried after her, trying not to look at the faces still watching from the station platform. Trying not to think about how thoroughly she'd just burned every bridge in a town where she didn't even know where the bridges were yet. Madam Lin walked fast despite the heat, her umbrella casting a small shadow that Clara kept trying to stay inside. They passed a general store with sun-faded awnings, a saloon with swinging doors that leaked piano music and tobacco smoke, a livery stable where 3 men stopped working to stare at Clara like she was something exotic and vaguely threatening. They always stare like that? Clara asked. At me? Yes. At you. It's new. Madam Lin didn't slow down. But it won't last. This town has a short memory for other people's suffering. Give them a week and they'll forget they ever laughed at you. Will they forget what Elias Reed did? No, they'll just decide it was justified somehow. Madam Lin turned down a narrow street Clara hadn't noticed. That's how men like him maintain respect, by convincing everyone that cruelty is just honesty. The restaurant appeared almost without warning, a low building with red shutters and Chinese characters painted above the door. It looked out of place in Dust Hollow, too colorful and too deliberate, like someone had decided to build exactly what they wanted and hadn't asked permission first. You live here alone? Clara asked. For 20 years. Madam Lin pushed open the door. My husband built this place, then died 6 months later. The town waited for me to fail or leave. I didn't either. The interior smelled like ginger and star anise and something else Clara couldn't identify. The tables were empty, the chairs stacked neatly. Everything was clean in a way that spoke of relentless, punishing effort. I don't open for dinner service until 6, Madam Lin said, setting her umbrella in a stand by the door. That gives you 2 hours to decide if you can actually do this work, or if you're just running on stubborn pride. Probably both, Clara admitted. That's honest. Madam Lin studied her for a long moment. The room is upstairs, small but clean. You'll help with prep work, cleaning, serving when we're busy. I pay nothing but room and board for the first month. After that, we'll see if you're worth wages. It was possibly the worst employment offer Clara had ever received. It was also the only one. What's the catch? Clara asked. The catch is that Elias Reed eats here twice a week, and you'll have to serve him without spitting in his food. Madam Lin's expression didn't change. Can you do that? Clara thought about the letters she was still carrying, now damp with sweat and crumpled beyond saving. Thought about Elias's face on the platform, cold and dismissive. Thought about the child's voice asking why she was fat and the way the whole town had laughed. "I can do that," she said, "but I make no promises about smiling." "I don't need you to smile. I need you to work." Madam Lin pointed toward a door at the back. "Kitchen is through there. Upstairs is the second door on the right. Unpack fast. We have vegetables that won't chop themselves." Clara climbed the narrow stairs with her suitcase banging against her hip, found a room barely big enough for a bed and a dresser, and sat down hard on the thin mattress. Through the window, she could see Dust Hollow spreading out in the failing light, small and mean and already hostile. She pulled out the letters one more time. 6 months of lies, carefully written in handwriting she'd memorized. 6 months of imagining a different life while her brothers' wives made increasingly pointed comments about spinsters and charity cases. Clara carried the letters downstairs and fed them into the kitchen stove one at a time, watching the paper curl and blacken. Madam Lin watched her do it without comment, then handed her a knife and pointed at a basket of ginger root. "Start with that," she said, "and try not to cut yourself. I don't need blood in the prep area." Clara picked up the knife. It was heavier than she expected, well balanced, the kind of tool someone who actually cooked would own. Her hands knew this weight, knew this motion. She'd spent enough years breaking down pork shoulders in her father's shop. The ginger skin came away in thin strips. The smell was sharp and clean. "You know how to use a knife," Madam Lin observed. "My father was a butcher." Clara kept her eyes on her work. "Before he became a drunk." "And your mother?" "Dead." "Brothers? Sisters?" "3 brothers, all married, none interested in a sister who might compete for inheritance they haven't earned yet." The words came out more bitter than Clara intended. "I'm here because staying there meant being grateful for scraps from people who resented feeding me." Madam Lin was quiet for a moment. Then, "So you traded one place that didn't want you for another place that doesn't want you. The difference is that this place doesn't pretend to want me out of family obligation." Clara finished the ginger and reached for a second root. "And I don't owe anyone here my gratitude. You'll earn enemies that way. I already have enemies. At least these ones are honest about it." Madam Lin made a sound that might have been approval. She pulled out a cleaver and started working through a chicken with efficient, brutal strikes. "The town thinks I'm strange. Probably immoral. Definitely too Chinese for their comfort. They eat my food because it's good and cheap, but they don't invite me to their churches or their homes." "Do you care?" Clara asked. "Not particularly." Madam Lin separated the chicken into parts with 3 quick cuts. "I learned a long time ago that other people's respect is expensive and usually not worth the cost. Better to be useful than liked." Clara thought about that while she worked through the basket of ginger. Outside, the sky was darkening to purple. Somewhere in this town, Elias Reed was probably having dinner, probably telling the story of the Boston woman who'd lied about her appearance, probably being congratulated for his honesty and good judgment. And Clara was chopping ginger in a Chinese restaurant kitchen, owned by a woman the town had decided didn't matter. Somehow, that felt like exactly where she was supposed to be. "There's something else you should know," Madam Lin said eventually, "about why I offered you work." Clara looked up. "I figured you needed help." "I do, but I also need someone who understands what it's like to be rejected by this town." Madam Lin wiped her cleaver clean. "Because in about 3 days, I'm going to ask you to do something dangerous, and you're going to say yes because you have nowhere else to go." "What kind of dangerous?" "The kind that involves a dying rancher 4 miles outside town. A man everyone has already decided deserves to die alone." Madam Lin met Clara's eyes. "His name is Wade Mercer, and if you can keep him alive, you'll earn more than room and board. You'll earn a future." Clara's hand stilled on the knife. "Why would you help me earn a future?" "Because 20 years ago I was standing where you are, new to this town, rejected by its standards, with nothing but my will to survive." Madam Lin's expression was unreadable. "And someone helped me anyway. Consider this paying forward a debt." "Who helped you?" "Wade Mercer's wife." Madam Lin turned back to her work. Before this town decided she wasn't worth respecting either. Outside, the first stars were appearing over Dust Hollow. Clara watched them through the kitchen window and thought about dying ranchers and debts paid forward and the strange mathematics of survival. She thought about Elias Reed's face on the platform. She thought about the way the whole town had laughed. And she thought, fine, if this town wants to see what a rejected woman can do, I'll show them exactly what they've unleashed. When do I meet this rancher? Clara asked. Madame Lynn smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. 3 days, she said. Give yourself 3 days to build up your strength. You're going to need it. Those 3 days passed like wading through mud. Clara learned the rhythm of Madame Lynn's kitchen, the breakfast rush that wasn't really a rush, just 5 or 6 ranch hands who ate fast and left coins on the counter without making eye contact. The lunch service where townswomen came in pairs, speaking just loud enough for Clara to hear their theories about why any decent woman would work for a Chinese widow instead of taking the train home where she belonged. Clara served them eggs and rice and kept her mouth shut. She was getting good at that. Elias Reed came in on the second day, just before noon, with 2 men Clara didn't recognize. He took a table by the window without acknowledging her existence, like she was part of the furniture Madame Lynn had arranged. Clara brought water glasses and tried not to let her hand shake. The usual, Elias said, still not looking at her. Clara didn't know what the usual was. She looked at Madame Lynn, who was watching from the kitchen doorway with an expression that gave nothing away. Steak and potatoes, Madame Lynn called out. Eggs on top. He likes them runny. Clara wrote it down even though she'd remember, then walked back to the kitchen with Elias's laughter following her. He was telling his companions something that made them grin, their eyes tracking Clara like she was a joke that kept getting funnier. You're doing fine, Madame Lynn said quietly, cracking eggs into a pan. I want to break that plate over his head. I know. Don't. Madame Lynn flipped the eggs with a practiced wrist motion. Men like Elias Reed need you to lose control. It confirms everything they already believe about women who don't know their place. And what is my place exactly? Anywhere you can survive long enough to prove them wrong. Madame Lynn slid the eggs onto the steak, added potatoes from a skillet. Take this out. Smile if you can manage it. And remember that his opinion stopped mattering the moment he abandoned you on that platform. Clara carried the plate out, set it in front of Elias without meeting his eyes, started to turn away. Wait, Elias said. Clara stopped. The restaurant had gone quiet in that particular way that meant everyone was listening. You're still here, Elias observed, like he was commenting on the weather. I work here. I can see that. I meant in Dust Hollow. He cut into his steak, watching the egg yolk run. I assumed you'd have the sense to leave by now. You assumed wrong. One of his companions snorted. Elias's jaw tightened, just barely, but Clara saw it. This town doesn't have room for women who don't understand their circumstances, Elias said. You'd be more comfortable back east. Comfort's overrated, Clara said. I'll manage. She walked away before he could respond, her heart hammering so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Behind her, Elias's voice rose just loud enough to carry, well, at least she's good for entertainment. His companions laughed. A few other diners joined in, that same shallow chuckling Clara was learning to recognize as Dust Hollow's favorite sound. Madame Lynn was waiting in the kitchen. You did well. I didn't do anything. Exactly. You didn't give him what he wanted. Madame Lynn handed her a cleaver and pointed at a chicken. Now break that down and stop thinking about men who aren't worth the energy. Clara took the cleaver. The chicken came apart under her hands with satisfying brutality. Wings separated at the joint, legs pulled away from the body, breast meat carved clean from the bone. Her father had taught her this when she was 12, back when the butcher shop still mattered, and he still showed up sober more days than not. You're angry, Madame Lynn observed. Of course I'm angry. Good. Anger is useful if you don't let it make you stupid. Madame Lynn pulled out a pot and started filling it with water. Tomorrow, you'll need that anger. Wade Mercer's ranch is 4 miles out. You'll take the cart at dawn. Clara's hand stilled on the chicken. You still haven't told me why he's dying. Infection, grief, whiskey? Pick any combination. Madame Lynn set the pot on the stove. His wife died 8 months ago. Fever took her and their baby girl in the same week. After that, Wade stopped caring whether he lived or not. And the town just let him rot out there? The town decided he got what he deserved. Madame Lynn's voice was flat. Maria, his wife, was Mexican. The baby was too dark for some people's comfort. When they died, certain people said it was for the best. Wade heard those comments. He hasn't been back to town since the funeral. Clara felt something cold settle in her stomach. Elias Reed, he was one of the people who said it. Elias Reed led the chorus. Madam Lynn turned to face her. He's been trying to buy Wade's ranch for 2 years. Wade kept refusing. After Maria died, Elias started spreading rumors that Wade was too broken to run a ranch, that the land would be better served by someone stable, someone respectable, someone white. That too. Madam Lynn pulled out vegetables and started chopping with mechanical efficiency. The bank is ready to foreclose. Wade owes $800. He has 30 days to pay or they auction the ranch. Elias plans to buy it for half what it's worth. Why are you telling me this? Bob, because in about 12 hours, you're going to ride out there and find a man who might already be dead. If he's alive, you're going to save him, whether he wants saving or not. Madam Lynn's knife never stopped moving. And if you succeed, you'll have made an enemy of the most powerful man in Dust Hollow. Clara thought about that, about Elias Reed's cold eyes and the way the town parted for him and the casual cruelty of abandoning someone on a train platform for public entertainment. I already have that enemy, Clara said. Might as well earn it properly. Madam Lynn smiled. It was the first genuine smile Clara had seen from her. That's what I thought, she said. Now finish that chicken and get some sleep. You'll need your strength for what's coming. That night, Clara lay in her narrow bed and listened to Dust Hollow settling into darkness. Somewhere out there, a man was dying alone because his wife had been the wrong color and his grief made people uncomfortable. Somewhere out there, Elias Reed was sleeping soundly, secure in the knowledge that his cruelty was just good business sense. And somewhere between those 2 points, Clara Whitmore was deciding that maybe being abandoned on a train platform was the best thing that had ever happened to her, because it meant she had nothing left to lose. The cart was waiting at dawn, hitched to an old mare that looked about as enthusiastic about the journey as Clara felt. Madam Lynn loaded supplies without speaking, bandages, a bottle of something that smelled like it could strip paint, dried herbs Clara didn't recognize, and a ceramic jug that sloshed when Clara picked it up. Soup, Madam Lynn said. If he can keep anything down, it should be that. What if he's already dead? Then you bury him and come back. Madam Lynn handed her a canteen. But I don't think he's dead yet. Wade Mercer is too stubborn for that. The road out of town was barely a road, more like a suggestion scratched into the prairie by wagon wheels and hope. Clara drove the cart with the reins loose in her hands, letting the mare pick her own pace. The sun was coming up angry and red, promising another day of relentless heat. 4 miles felt like 40. The landscape didn't change much, flat scrubland dotted with mesquite, the occasional windmill standing like a skeleton against the sky. Clara passed one other ranch, a tidy spread with whitewashed fences and cattle grazing in organized clusters. A woman hanging laundry stopped to stare as Clara drove past. Clara didn't wave. The Mercer Ranch announced itself with a broken gate hanging from one hinge. Beyond that, the signs of decay multiplied. Fences sagging, weeds choking what might have once been a garden, a barn with half its roof missing. The house itself was small and tired, the kind of structure that was held together more by stubbornness than carpentry. Clara stopped the cart and sat there for a moment, trying to convince herself this wasn't insane. She was about to walk into a dying stranger's house and demand he let her save his life, all because a Chinese widow had decided Clara needed a purpose beyond serving eggs to people who laughed at her. Well, Clara said to the mare, at least it's not boring. The mare flicked an ear but offered no other opinion. Clara climbed down and approached the house. The front door was closed but not latched. She knocked anyway, hard enough to hurt her knuckles. No answer. She knocked again. Mr. Mercer? My name is Clara Whitmore. Madam Lynn sent me. Still nothing. But Clara could hear something now. Ragged breathing, maybe, or just the wind moving through the damaged roof. She pushed the door open. The smell hit her first. Infection and unwashed human and whiskey, and something else she recognized from her father's final days. The particular stink of someone who'd stopped caring whether they lived in filth. The interior was dark, curtains drawn against the daylight, but Clara could make out shapes. Overturned furniture, broken glass, clothes scattered like someone had thrown them and never picked them up. And in the corner, on a bed that might have been made weeks ago or never, a man. Clara's eyes adjusted enough to see that he was breathing, at least. chest rising and falling in shallow movements. One leg extended at an angle that looked wrong, wrapped in bandages that had gone from white to brown to something darker. "Mr. Mercer," Clara said again, quieter now. His eyes opened. Even in the dimness, Clara could see they were fever-bright and unfocused. "Go away," he said. His voice was wrecked barely more than a rasp. "Already told the preacher, don't want prayers, don't want company, just want to be left alone." "I'm not the preacher," Clara said, "and I'm not here to pray." "Don't care who you are, get out." Clara stepped further into the room instead. "When's the last time you changed those bandages?" "None of your business." "When's the last time you ate?" "Don't remember, don't care." Wade tried to shift position and made a sound that was pure agony swallowed too late. "Christ, just leave." "Can't do that," Clara said. She walked to the window and yanked the curtains open. Sunlight poured in, harsh and revealing. The room was worse than she'd thought. Bottles everywhere, dried blood on the floor near the bed, a pistol within easy reach on the nightstand. Wade threw an arm over his eyes. "What the hell is wrong with you?" "Long list. We don't have time for it." Clara turned to look at him properly. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 35, with dark hair matted with sweat, and a face that would have been handsome if it wasn't currently the color of old paper. The bad leg was propped on a filthy pillow, the bandages crusted with drainage. "That leg is infected," Clara said. "Brilliant observation." "When did it happen?" "Week ago. Horse rolled on it." Wade's jaw was clenched tight enough that Clara could see the muscles jumping. "Got the horse off. Didn't get the damage off." "Did you see a doctor?" "Doctor's in town. I don't go to town." He managed to focus on her through the fever haze. "Who the hell are you again?" "Clara Whitmore. Madam Lynn sent me." Something shifted in Wade's expression. "Lynn sent you? Why?" "Because you're dying, and apparently that bothers her more than it bothers you." Clara moved closer to the bed. "I'm going to look at that leg now." "Like hell you are." "You can cooperate or not. Either way, I'm looking." Clara pulled a knife from her pocket, the same one she'd been using for vegetables in Madam Lynn's kitchen. "This is going to hurt." "Everything hurts," Wade said. "What's one more thing?" Clara cut through the bandages carefully, trying not to jostle the leg more than necessary. Wade made sounds he was trying to swallow, breathing hard through his nose. When the last layer came away, Clara had to force herself not to step back. The wound ran from just below Wade's knee to mid-shin, deep enough that she could see tendon in places where the flesh had split. But worse than the wound itself was the infection radiating out from it. Red streaks climbing toward his knee, skin hot and swollen, pus weeping from places the bandage had stuck. "When did it start smelling sweet?" Clara asked. Wade's eyes sharpened slightly. "You know what that means? My father was a butcher. I know what gangrene smells like." Clara stood up. "You should have cut this leg off days ago." "Tried," Wade said. "Couldn't reach the saw. Too drunk. Passed out." He laughed, a bitter sound. "Story of my life lately. Can't even manage to die properly." Clara walked back to the cart and started hauling in supplies. Wade watched her with the dull interest of someone watching a stranger rearrange furniture in a burning house. "What are you doing?" he asked when Clara came back with the ceramic jug and the bottle of Madam Lynn's mystery liquid. "Saving your leg if I can. Saving your life either way." Clara pulled the cork from the bottle and the smell made her eyes water. "This is going to hurt worse than anything you've felt yet." "Can't hurt worse than watching my wife die." Clara stopped, looked at him. Wade's eyes were closed now. His face turned toward the wall. "No," Clara said quietly. "It probably can't. But I'm going to pour this in your wound anyway, and you're going to scream, and then you're going to drink some soup and keep breathing. Understand?" "Why do you care?" "I don't," Clara said honestly. "I don't know you, but Madam Lynn cares, and she gave me a place when everyone else in this town decided I was too fat and too unwanted to matter. So if she says you're worth saving, I'm going to save you." Wade opened his eyes, really looked at her for the first time. "You're the woman from the train station." "You heard about that?" "Everyone heard about that. Elias Reed made sure of it." Wade's voice was getting weaker. "You should have left. This town doesn't deserve people like you." "This town doesn't get a vote anymore," Clara said. She knelt beside the bed with the bottle. "Ready?" "No." Good answer, Clara poured. Wade's scream probably reached the next ranch. His back arched off the bed and his hands clawed at the mattress hard enough that his knuckles went white. Clara held his legs steady and kept pouring, watching the infection bubble and foam under the onslaught of whatever Lynn had given her. When the bottle was empty, Wade was sobbing through clenched teeth, tears running down into his hair. I know, Clara said. I know it hurts. But you're still breathing, which means you're still alive, which means we're winning. Doesn't feel like winning, Wade gasped. It never does. That's how you know it's real. Clara started wrapping fresh bandages, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who dressed her father's wounds more times than she could count. You're going to drink some soup now. Can't. Then you're going to try and fail and try again until you can. Clara fetched the jug and a spoon. Open your mouth. Wade looked at her like she was insane. Then slowly, he opened his mouth. The soup went down badly at first, Wade gagging, Clara waiting, then trying again. But eventually his body remembered what food was for, and he managed half a cup before exhaustion dragged him under. Clara sat back on her heels and looked around the wrecked room. This was going to take more than one day. She found a broom with most of its bristles still attached and started sweeping. Glass went into a pile by the door. Clothes got sorted into wash and burn. Bottles got counted, 23 empties, and carried outside. By the time the floor was visible again, Clara's back was screaming, and her hands were raw. Wade woke up sometime around noon, disoriented and reaching for the pistol on the nightstand. Don't, Clara said from where she was scrubbing dried blood off the floor. You'll just make more mess. Wade blinked at her. You're still here. Obviously. Why? Because you're not dead yet, and I came all this way. Seems wasteful to leave now. Clara wrung out the rag she'd been using. The water in the bucket was rust-colored. How's the leg feel? Like someone poured fire into it. Good. Means the nerves still work. Clara stood up with a groan. You need to drink more soup. I need whiskey. You need to not die of infection, Clara said. Whiskey can wait. They fought about it for 10 minutes. Wade was weak from fever and blood loss, but he was still a grown man who'd spent his life doing physical labor, and when he decided to be stubborn about something, it showed. Clara won by the simple expedient of putting the soup jug where Wade couldn't reach it and sitting on the only chair until he agreed to drink. You're mean, Wade said after he'd managed another half cup. I'm practical. There's a difference. Clara watched him lie back against the pillows she'd straightened. Tell me about the bank. Wade's eyes sharpened. Lynn told you. She told me you owe $800 and Elias Reed is circling like a buzzard. That's about the shape of it. Wade closed his eyes. Maria got sick in January. Baby was already weak. I spent everything I had trying to save them. Doctors, medicine, special food Lynn thought might help. Borrowed from the bank to cover it. They died anyway. I'm sorry, Clara said, and meant it. Everyone's sorry. Sorry doesn't pay debts. Wade's voice was bitter. After the funeral, I couldn't make myself care about the ranch. Couldn't make myself care about anything. Cattle wandered off. Fences fell. Bills piled up. And Elias Reed showed up every week with a new offer, each one lower than the last. Why does he want this place so badly? Water rights. My property controls access to the best creek for 20 miles. Whoever owns this ranch owns half the grazing land in the county. Wade opened his eyes. Elias has been trying to buy me out for years. Maria always said no. She loved this place, said it reminded her of her family's land in Sonora. Clara looked around the room, tried to imagine it before grief and infection and whiskey had reduced it to this. How much time do you have? Auction's in 26 days. Wade laughed, but there was no humor in it. But I'll probably be dead by then, so Elias wins anyway. He always does. Maybe, Clara said. Or maybe you'll live long enough to disappoint him. Why would you care if I do? Clara thought about that, about Elias Reed's face on the train platform, about the way the town had laughed, about Madame Lynn's quiet certainty that Clara needed this as much as Wade did. Boo! 'Cause the same man who's trying to steal your ranch is the man who humiliated me in front of your whole town, Clara said finally, and I'm discovering I have a talent for holding grudges. Wade studied her. You don't even know me. No, but I know what it's like when people decide you're not worth their time. Clara stood up and started gathering the cleaning supplies. I'm coming back tomorrow. Try not to die before then. Can't promise that. Try anyway. Clara headed for the door, then stopped. One more thing. If you're going to shoot yourself with that pistol, wait until I'm gone. I don't want to waste Madame Lin's soup. She left before Wade could respond. The ride back to town took less time than the ride out. Clara's hands were blistered and her dress was filthy, and she smelled like infection and floor cleaner, but something in her chest felt lighter than it had in months. Madame Lin was waiting at the restaurant, working through the dinner prep with mechanical precision. Well? She asked without looking up. He's alive. Leg's bad, but I don't think it's unsavable yet. Clara washed her hands in the basin by the door. He's also drunk, grieving, and about as cooperative as a cat in a rainstorm. That sounds like Wade. Lynn cracked eggs into a bowl. You're going back tomorrow. It wasn't a question. I'm going back tomorrow, Clara confirmed. Good. He'll fight you every step. Don't let him win. Lynn looked up finally. How do you feel? Clara considered that. Her back hurt, her hands hurt. She was exhausted in a way that went bone deep, but underneath all that was something else. Purpose, maybe, or just the satisfaction of having done something that mattered instead of just surviving. Like I just declared war on a dying man's stubbornness, Clara said, and possibly on Elias Reed's plans. Both wars worth fighting, Lynn said. She handed Clara a clean apron. Now help me with dinner service. We have customers coming. Elias Reed came in that night with a different set of companions. He took the same table by the window and ordered the same meal. When Clara brought his plate, he looked up at her with something calculating in his eyes. I heard you took a ride out of town today, he said. Clara set down the plate without responding. The Mercer Ranch, Elias continued. Interesting choice. That place is falling apart faster than Wade's leg is rotting. Is there a point to this conversation? Clara asked. Just curious what a woman in your position thinks she's doing out there. Elias cut into his steak. Wade Mercer is a lost cause. Everyone knows it. You're wasting your time. My time to waste, Clara said. True enough. Elias smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Just seems odd. A woman shows up in town with nowhere to go, and suddenly she's playing nurse to a man everyone else has already buried. Makes a person wonder what you're hoping to get out of it. Clara leaned in close enough that only Elias could hear her. What I'm hoping to get out of it is watching you lose something you want, because I'm discovering that's even more satisfying than I imagined. She straightened up and walked away before Elias could respond, her heart hammering but her head high. Behind her, Elias's voice carried across the restaurant. That woman's going to learn some hard lessons about this town. His companions agreed with the easy certainty of men who'd never had to learn anything hard in their lives. But Clara was already back in the kitchen, and Madame Lin was watching her with something that might have been approval. And for the first time since she'd stepped off that train, Clara Whitmore felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Even if where she was supposed to be was standing between a dying rancher and the man who wanted him dead. The days folded into each other like laundry. Clara couldn't quite get clean. Every morning before dawn, she'd hitch up Madame Lin's mare and ride out to the Mercer Ranch with fresh bandages and soup and a stubbornness that matched Wade's almost exactly. Every evening, she'd ride back exhausted and filthy, help Lynn with dinner service, and fall into bed too tired to dream. Wade fought her every single day. I don't need you here, he said on the fourth morning when Clara arrived to find him trying to stand on his bad leg. Sit down before you fall down, Clara said, dumping her supplies on the table she'd cleared 2 days ago. It's my house. I'll stand if I want. It'll be your grave if you tear those stitches. Clara crossed the room and physically pushed him back onto the bed. Wade was stronger than he looked, even fevered and half-starved, but Clara had spent 10 years wrestling pig carcasses in her father's shop. She knew how to use her weight. Wade sat, glared at her. You're the most aggravating woman I've ever met. Good. Means you're paying attention. Clara unwrapped his leg with hands that had stopped shaking somewhere around day 2. The wound looked better, still angry and red, but the sweet smell was fading and the swelling had started to recede. This is healing. Doesn't feel like healing. Because healing hurts worse than dying. Dying is easy. Your body knows how to do that without any help. Clara cleaned the wound with steady strokes, ignoring Wade's sharp intake of breath. Living takes work. Maybe I don't want to do the work. Clara stopped and looked at him directly. Then tell me to leave. Say it straight and mean it, and I'll walk out that door and never come back. Wade's jaw worked. His hands were fisted in the blanket hard enough that his knuckles showed white. For a long moment, Clara thought he might actually say it. Instead, he looked away. The soup's getting better. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting today. Wade closed his eyes. How much does Lynn charge for this? The supplies, the time, your labor. I can't pay it. She's not charging anything. Wade's eyes snapped open. Why not? Because your wife was kind to her once. And because Lynn believes in paying forward debts. Clara started wrapping fresh bandages. Also because she knows it irritates Elias Reed, and that's payment enough. Something shifted in Wade's expression. Reed knows you're coming out here? The whole town knows. Hard to hide when I'm driving a cart down the main road every morning. Clara tied off the bandage. He made a comment about it last night at dinner. Something about me wasting my time on lost causes. He's not wrong. He's not right either. Clara stood up and stretched, her back cracking in 3 places. You're still breathing, your leg is healing, and yesterday you managed to eat solid food without vomiting. That's not a lost cause. That's progress. Wade was quiet for a moment. Then, why are you doing this? And don't tell me it's because Lynn asked. There's something else. Clara walked to the window and looked out at the ranch. In the week she'd been coming here, she'd started to see past the decay to what this place must have been. Good bones under the rot. Potential under the grief. You want the truth? She asked. Wouldn't have asked otherwise. I'm doing this because the man who destroyed my life in front of your entire town is the same man who wants you dead and buried so he can steal your land. Clara turned to face Wade. And I've discovered I'm petty enough to risk everything just to watch him lose something he wants. Wade stared at her. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. It was a rough sound, like he'd forgotten how, but it was genuine. That's honest, he said. Probably the most honest thing anyone's said to me in months. I'm not good at lying. My face gives me away. Clara came back to the bed. You need to sleep. I'm going to work on the fence by the north pasture. You don't have to do that. The fence is falling over, and I have 2 hours before I need to head back. I can either fix fence or watch you sleep, and fixing fence seems more useful. Clara grabbed a hammer she'd found in the barn. Unless you'd rather I stay and stare at you. Fix the fence, Wade said quickly. Then, quieter. Thank you. Clara paused in the doorway. For what? For not asking about Maria. Everyone else who came out here, before I stopped letting people come, they all wanted to know about her, about the baby. Like grief was something I owed them details on. Wade's voice was rough. You just show up, fix things, and leave. It's the first peace I've had in months. Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and left. The fence was worse than it looked from the house. Clara spent 2 hours hammering posts back into place and restringing wire that had gone slack. The work was hot and brutal, and her hands were screaming by the end of it, but the fence stood straight when she was done. Good enough, she thought. Not perfect, but good enough. On the ride back to town, Clara's mind was turning over numbers. $800. 22 days left. Wade was getting stronger, but not strong enough to work yet. The ranch was stabilizing, but stabilizing wasn't the same as profitable. Even if Wade survived, even if his leg healed completely, he'd still lose everything to the bank unless they found that money. Clara had exactly $17 saved from her wages at Lynn's restaurant. It might as well have been 17 cents. The town square was busy when Clara drove through, busier than usual, with a crowd gathered near the general store. Clara could hear someone speaking, their voice carrying across the square with practiced projection. She recognized that voice. Elias Reed. Clara should have kept driving, should have gone straight back to Lynn's and minded her own business. Instead, she stopped the cart and pushed through the crowd to see what was happening. Elias stood on the general store's front steps like they were a stage built just for him. He was well-dressed as always, hat in hand, every inch the respectable rancher addressing his community. The crowd listened with the attentive silence of people who'd learned their opinions from whoever spoke loudest. Economic stability, Elias was saying. That's what this town needs. Not charity cases and failing ranches dragging down property values. We have standards here, standards that reflect the kind of community we want to build. A few people in the crowd nodded. Clara recognized some of them. The woman from the boarding house, the banker who'd refused to meet her eyes when she'd asked about opening an account, Pastor Hendricks looking grave and concerned. Now, I'm not saying we should be cruel, Elias continued, his voice dripping with false compassion. But facts are facts. Some people are simply not suited to ranch life. Some people make choices that lead to ruin. And when those people refuse help, refuse to see reason, well, at some point we have to accept reality. He was talking about Wade. Clara knew it as surely as she knew her own name. The Mercer property is valuable land, Elias said. Water rights that could serve 3, maybe 4 successful ranches instead of one dying operation. When the bank auction happens in 3 weeks, I intend to bid fairly and put that land to proper use. Use that benefits everyone in Dust Hollow. What about Wade Mercer? Someone called from the crowd. Clara couldn't see who. Elias's expression shifted to something that might have passed for regret if you didn't look too closely. Wade Mercer is a tragic case. Grief does terrible things to a man, but we can't let sentiment cloud good business sense. That ranch has been failing for months. The humane thing is to let it go to someone who can make it productive again. Humane, Clara said loudly, her voice cutting through the murmurs of agreement. The crowd turned. Elias's eyes found her, and something cold flickered across his face before he covered it with a smile. Miss Whitmore, he said, I didn't see you there. I'm sure you didn't. Clara pushed closer to the front. Her dress was filthy. Her hands were blistered, and she probably looked half wild, but she was past caring. Tell me, Mr. Reed, when you talk about humane treatment, does that include spreading rumors that a dying man's Mexican wife and mixed-race baby deserved what happened to them? The crowd went silent. Elias's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went flat. I don't know what you're referring to, he said carefully. I think you do. I think everyone here does. Clara looked around at the watching faces. I've been in this town less than 2 weeks, and I've already heard the stories about how people said it was for the best when Maria Mercer died, about how her baby was too dark, about how Wade should have known better than to marry a Mexican woman in the first place. A few people in the crowd had the decency to look uncomfortable. Most just stared. Those are serious accusations, Pastor Hendricks said from his spot near the front. Do you have proof of such statements? I have Wade Mercer's word, Clara said, and I have my own ears. I've heard the comments in Lynn's restaurant, the jokes about mixed blood and bad choices. She turned back to Elias. And I've heard you, Mr. Reed, making speeches about respectability while a man rots 4 miles out of town because your definition of respectable doesn't include his dead wife. Elias's face went tight. You have no idea what you're talking about, don't I? You've been trying to buy that ranch for years. Wade wouldn't sell, so you waited for tragedy to do your work for you. And when tragedy wasn't fast enough, you helped it along with rumors and isolation and self-righteous speeches about economic stability. Clara's voice was shaking now, but she didn't stop. You don't want that land because it's failing. You want it because Wade won't give it to you, and men like you can't stand being told no. The crowd was riveted. Clara could feel their attention like weight pressing against her skin. Elias came down the steps slowly, deliberately. When he spoke, his voice was low enough that only the people closest could hear. You're making a mistake, he said. This town doesn't have room for women who don't understand their place. You'd be wise to remember that. My place? Clara laughed, sharp and bitter. You mean the place where you abandoned me on a train platform in front of everyone here? That place? Elias's jaw clenched. Around them, people were starting to whisper. You lied in your letters, Elias said. I had every right to humiliate me publicly, to leave me stranded in a strange town with nowhere to go? Clara stepped closer. Tell me, Mr. Reed, if I'd been thinner, would you have married me anyway? Or were there other lies you would have found to justify cruelty? Elias's hand twitched like he wanted to do something with it, but couldn't decide what. His face was red now, angry spots of color high on his cheeks. This conversation is over, he said. You're right about that. Clara turned to address the crowd directly. You all watched me get abandoned at that station, watched it happen, and laughed like it was entertainment. And now you're watching Wade Mercer lose everything because grief made him inconvenient. She paused, making sure she had their attention. I want you to remember this moment, Clara continued. Remember that you had a choice. You could have offered help instead of judgment. You could have shown mercy instead of gossip, but you didn't. You sided with respectability over humanity. And when Wade loses that ranch, if he loses it, you'll all know exactly who to thank. Pastor Hendricks cleared his throat. Miss Whitmore, I think perhaps you're overwrought. I think perhaps you're complicit, Clara shot back. You stood on that platform too, Pastor. You watched a woman get humiliated and you looked away. Just like you're looking away now while Wade Mercer fights for his life alone because his wife was the wrong color. The pastor's face went pale. Several people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Elias recovered his composure, smoothing his expression back to something neutral and concerned. Clearly, Miss Whitmore is under significant strain. Perhaps someone should escort her back to Lynn's establishment before she says something she regrets. I don't regret anything I've said, Clara told him, and I'm not finished. You want that ranch? You're going to have to take it from a living man, because Wade Mercer is going to survive, and he's going to keep that land, and you're going to have to find someone else to bully. That's quite a promise, Elias said softly. From a woman who has nothing and is nothing in this town. You're right. I have nothing, which means I have nothing to lose. Clara smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. Can you say the same? She turned and walked back to the cart before Elias could respond. The crowd parted for her silently, and Clara could feel their stares following her all the way to the restaurant. Madame Lynn was waiting outside, arms crossed, expression unreadable. That was either very brave or very stupid, Lynn said. Probably both. Clara's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the reins. I just declared war on the most powerful man in town in front of half the population. Yes, you did. Lynn took the reins and started unhitching the mare. How does it feel? Clara thought about that, about Elias's face when she'd called him out, about the crowd's uncomfortable silence, about the way Pastor Hendricks had looked away. Terrifying, she admitted, but also right. Good, because now the real work starts. Lynn led the mare toward the small stable behind the restaurant. Elias Reed doesn't forgive challenges to his authority. He'll come after you, after Wade, after anyone connected to this. What about you? I've been in Elias Reed's crosshairs for 20 years. One more battle won't change much. Lynn paused. But Clara, you need to understand what you just did. You made this personal. Elias could have let Wade's ranch fail quietly and walked away with clean hands. Now his pride is involved. He'll fight harder. Let him fight, Clara said. I'm done watching powerful men destroy people just because they can. Lynn studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded, something like approval in her expression. Your hands are bleeding, she observed. Claire looked down. Her palms were raw from fence work, blisters torn open and weeping. She hadn't even noticed. I'll wrap them later, she said. Wrap them now. You're no good to anyone if infection sets in. Lynn headed toward the kitchen. Then help me with prep. We have a busy night ahead. Elias came to the restaurant that evening with 4 men instead of his usual 2. He took the largest table and ordered enough food for twice their number, making sure Clara had to make multiple trips from the kitchen. She served them without comment, keeping her face blank and her hands steady. I've been thinking about our conversation this afternoon, Elias said when Clara brought the 3rd round of drinks, about Wade Mercer and his ranch. Clara set down the glasses and waited. You seem very invested in his survival, Elias continued. One might wonder why a woman in your position would care so much about a stranger's failing property. One might wonder why a successful rancher cares so much about acquiring one more piece of land, Clara replied. Elias smiled. Business is business, Miss Whitmore. Surely you understand that. I understand that you've been circling Wade's ranch like a vulture for years. I understand that his wife's death was convenient for your plans. And I understand that you're scared I might actually keep him alive long enough to ruin those plans. One of Elias's companions shifted in his seat. Elias's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. Scared is a strong word, he said. Concerned might be more accurate. Concerned that you're giving Wade false hope, that you're encouraging him to fight a battle he's already lost. The battle isn't lost until the auction happens. 21 days from now. Elias leaned back in his chair. Even if Wade survives, and that's a generous if, he still owes $800 he doesn't have. Nursing him back to health doesn't change his debts. Maybe not, But it does change who owns that land when the dust settles. Clara picked up the empty plates. Will there be anything else? Just one thing. Elias's voice dropped low enough that only Clara could hear. You should know that I visited Wade's ranch this afternoon, while you were making your little speech in the square. Clara's hands went still. What did you say? I didn't say anything, just wanted to see the property for myself, assess its condition before the auction. Elias's smile was razor thin. The barn roof is in terrible shape. One strong wind and the whole structure could come down. Be a shame if Wade was inside when it happened. It wasn't quite a threat, but it was close enough that Clara's stomach went cold. If anything happens to Wade, she started. Then it happens, Elias cut her off. Accidents occur all the time on failing ranches, especially ones where the owner is too weak to properly maintain equipment, too grief-stricken to notice danger. He stood up, dropping coins on the table that were exactly enough for the meal with no tip. Think about that, Miss Whitmore. Think about whether your pride is worth a man's life. He left with his companions, their boots loud on the wooden floor. Clara stood there holding dirty plates and trying not to shake. Madame Lynn appeared at her elbow. What did he say? Lynn asked quietly. Veiled threats. Implications. Clara set the plates down before she dropped them. He went out to Wade's ranch this afternoon. Lynn's expression darkened. Did he go inside? I don't know. He didn't say. Clara turned to face her. But he mentioned the barn. How dangerous it is. Then we need to get Wade out of that house, Lynn said immediately. Tonight. He won't come. He's barely walking, and he's stubborn enough to die before he'll abandon his ranch because Elias Reed made threats. Then you stay there, Lynn said. Pack a bag. I'll manage here without you for a few days. Lynn, I can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm telling. Lynn's voice was firm. Elias Reed just showed his hand. He's done with subtle approaches. If you leave Wade alone tonight, you might find him dead in the morning with a barn beam through his chest and half the town calling it an accident. Clara's mind was racing. Lynn was right. She knew Lynn was right. But the thought of staying at Wade's ranch overnight, of putting herself between a dying man and Elias Reed's plans, was terrifying. What if Elias comes back? Clara asked. Then you make noise. Fire Wade's rifle if you have to. Anything to let people know something's happening. Lynn gripped Clara's shoulders. I know this is asking a lot, but Wade saved my life once, years ago, when this town wanted me gone. He and Maria were the only ones who stood up for me when someone tried to burn my restaurant down. I owe him this. And now you're the only one who can pay it. Clara thought about Wade's face when he talked about Maria, about the way his voice broke when he mentioned their daughter, about the careful way he was starting to trust that Clara might actually keep showing up. All right, she said. I'll go. Lynn nodded, already moving toward the kitchen. I'll pack food. You get blankets and anything else you need. The rifle is in my room, top shelf of the closet. Take it. 30 minutes later, Clara was back in the cart with enough supplies for 3 days and a rifle she barely knew how to use lying across her lap. The sky was darkening to purple, stars starting to prick through like holes in fabric. The ride to Wade's ranch felt longer in the growing dark. Every shadow looked threatening. Every sound made Clara's hand drift toward the rifle. Wade was asleep when she arrived, his breathing steady but still rough around the edges. Clara lit a lamp and checked his leg by the flickering light. Still healing, no new infection, small mercies. She was building up the fire when Wade woke with a start, reaching for the pistol that wasn't on the nightstand anymore. Clara had moved it after the first day. It's just me, Clara said quickly. Wade blinked at her, disoriented. Why are you here? It's night. I'm staying for a few days. The hell you are. Elias Reed came to your ranch this afternoon, Clara said bluntly. Made comments about your barn being dangerous, about how accidents happen. Wade went very still. He threatened me? He threatened both of us. He was trying to scare me off. Clara sat down in the chair by the bed. It didn't work, but it did convince me that leaving you alone is a bad idea until the auction's over. Clara, you can't stay here. It's not... People will talk. People are already talking. They've been talking since the moment I stepped off that train. Clara pulled a blanket around her shoulders. I don't care anymore. I care about keeping you alive long enough to make Elias Reed choke on his own arrogance. Wade was quiet for a long moment. Outside, wind rattled the windows. The fire crackled and popped. "You're insane," Wade said finally. "Probably. Is that a problem?" "No." Wade's voice was soft. "No? I don't think it is." They sat in silence after that, listening to the night sounds. Clara dozed in the chair, the rifle propped against her knee, jerking awake at every unfamiliar noise. Around midnight, she heard horses. Clara was on her feet immediately, rifle in hand, heart hammering. Wade struggled to sit up. "Stay down," Clara hissed. "Like hell." Wade grabbed the edge of the bed and hauled himself upright, his bad leg dragging. "Hand me my rifle." "You can barely stand." "I can still shoot." Wade's voice was steady despite the pain in his face. "Give me the rifle, Clara." She handed it over because there wasn't time to argue. The horses were getting closer, multiple riders by the sound of it, moving slow and deliberate. Clara doused the lamp, plunging the room into darkness broken only by the firelight. Through the window, she could see shapes moving in the yard. 3 riders, maybe 4. One of them approached the barn. Clara watched him dismount, watched him pull something from his saddlebag. "They're going to burn it," Wade said, his voice tight with fury. "They're going to burn my barn." "We can rebuild a barn," Clara said. "We can't rebuild you." But Wade was already moving toward the door, dragging his bad leg, rifle clutched in white-knuckled hands. Clara grabbed his arm. "Wade, don't!" "That barn has Maria's tools in it, her saddle, the cradle I built for the baby." Wade's voice cracked. "I'm not letting them burn what's left of my family." He shook her off and stumbled out the door. Clara cursed and followed, her own rifle feeling impossibly heavy in her hands. The man at the barn had just struck a match when Wade's voice rang out across the yard. "Take one more step and I'll put a bullet through your chest." The match went out. The rider froze. His companions wheeled their horses around. Clara could see them clearly now in the moonlight, young men, maybe 20 years old, the kind who'd do anything for respect or money, or both. "We don't want trouble," one of them called. "Then you came to the wrong place." Wade's rifle was steady despite the way he was leaning against the porch rail. "This is my land, my barn, and if you light that match, I will kill you where you stand." "Mr. Reed said—" "I don't care what Elias Reed said." Wade cocked the rifle, the sound loud in the still night. "You tell Mr. Reed that the next person who comes onto my property with bad intentions leaves in a box. Understand?" The man with the match dropped it and backed away from the barn. His companions were already turning their horses. "This isn't over," one of them said. "Yes, it is." Clara stepped onto the porch, her rifle raised even though her hands were shaking. "Because if you come back, the whole town will know Elias Reed hired you to commit arson, and somehow I don't think that's going to help his respectability." The riders exchanged glances. Then, without another word, they spurred their horses and disappeared into the darkness. Clara and Wade stood on the porch for a long time after they were gone, listening to make sure they didn't circle back. Finally, Wade lowered his rifle. "You were right," he said, "about Elias. About everything." "I wish I'd been wrong." Clara took the rifle from Wade's shaking hands. "Come on, let's get you inside before you fall over." Wade let her help him back to the bed. His bad leg was bleeding through the bandage from the exertion, and his face was gray with pain. "That was stupid," Clara said, cutting away the bandage. "You could have torn everything we've spent 2 weeks healing." Had to be done. "You had to almost die to stop them from burning an empty barn?" "It's not empty to me." Wade closed his eyes. "Everything I have left of them is in that barn. The rest of the house, I can let it rot. But not that." Clara cleaned the wound silently, rewrapped it with hands that were finally steady again. When she was done, Wade caught her wrist. "Thank you," he said, "for being here, for standing with me. I know you didn't have to." "Yes, I did," Clara said, "because if I'd stayed in town and something had happened to you, I'd never forgive myself." Wade's grip tightened slightly. "Why?" Clara thought about that, about how somewhere in the past 2 weeks, keeping Wade Mercer alive had stopped being about revenge on Elias Reed and started being about something else, something she didn't have words for yet. "Because you're not a lost cause," she said finally, "and I'm tired of watching people give up on things that still have fight left in them." Wade released her wrist. "Get some sleep. I'll keep watch for a while." Your leg will be fine for a few hours. Besides, I couldn't sleep now if I wanted to. Wade picked up his rifle again. Go on, you've earned the rest. Clara curled up in the chair with her blanket and tried to sleep. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw those riders in the yard, saw the match flame, saw how close they'd come to losing everything. And she thought about Elias Reed, sitting in his comfortable house in town, making plans and issuing orders and believing he'd already won. 21 days until the auction, $800 they didn't have, a barn full of memories and a ranch barely holding together. But Wade was alive. Wade was fighting, and somewhere in the wreckage of the past 2 weeks, Clara had found something she hadn't had since Boston, a reason to wake up angry instead of defeated. Outside, the wind picked up. Inside, the fire burned low. And Clara Whitmore fell asleep thinking about all the ways she was going to make Elias Reed regret the day he abandoned her on that train platform. Because if there was one thing she'd learned in Dust Hollow, it was this. The woman who has nothing left to lose is the most dangerous woman of all. Dawn came too early and too bright, sunlight stabbing through the windows like it had a personal grudge. Clara woke with her neck cramped from the chair and Wade already awake, staring at the ceiling with an expression she couldn't read. You didn't sleep, she said. Couldn't. Wade's voice was hoarse. Kept thinking about what happens in 20 days when the bank comes calling and we're still $800 short. Clara stood and stretched, her spine cracking in protest. We'll figure it out. How? I can barely walk. The ranch is falling apart. Even if I could work, there's no time to turn a profit before the auction. Wade finally looked at her. You've done everything you can, Clara, more than anyone had a right to ask. But maybe Elias was right. Maybe this is a fight that's already over. Don't. Clara's voice came out sharper than she intended. Don't you dare give up now. Not after everything. I'm being realistic. You're being a coward. Clara immediately regretted the words, but they were out now, hanging in the air between them. Sorry. That was true, Wade finished. You're right. I am being a coward. It's easier to quit than keep fighting and lose anyway. Clara sat down on the edge of the bed, careful not to jostle his leg. When I got off that train and Elias looked at me like I was something he'd stepped in, I had two choices. I could get back on the train and prove everyone in Boston right about me, or I could stay and make something out of spite and stubbornness. Which did you choose? Both. I stayed out of spite, but somewhere along the way it stopped being about proving anyone wrong and started being about proving myself right. Clara looked at Wade directly. You think you're fighting for a piece of land, but you're not. You're fighting to prove that grief doesn't have to be the end of your story. Wade was quiet for a long moment. Then, Maria would have liked you. She had that same kind of mean honesty. Mean honesty is the only kind worth having. Clara stood up. Now let's change that bandage, and then you're going to eat actual food instead of just soup. Yes, ma'am, Wade said, but there was something almost like a smile in his voice. The next 3 days fell into a rhythm that was almost comfortable. Clara stayed at the ranch, sleeping in the chair with Wade's rifle across her lap, waking at every sound. During the day she worked, mending fences, clearing brush, hauling water, doing the 100 small tasks that kept a ranch from sliding into complete ruin. Wade's strength was returning in fits and starts. By the second day he could stand without help. By the third, he was walking short distances with a cane Clara had carved from a broken fence post. His leg was healing crooked, would probably always have a limp, but he was healing. On the fourth morning, Clara rode back to town to check on Madame Lynn and restock supplies. The restaurant was busy with breakfast customers when she arrived, and Lynn was moving between tables with the efficiency of someone who'd been doing this alone for 20 years. You look terrible, Lynn said when Clara walked into the kitchen. Thanks, I feel terrible. Clara collapsed into a chair. But Wade's getting stronger. The ranch is stabilizing. We just need $800 you don't have, Lynn finished. I've been thinking about that. Clara looked up. And I have some savings. Not enough to cover the whole debt, but maybe a third of it. Lynn poured tea and set it in front of Clara. It's yours if you need it. Lynn, I can't take your money. Why not? You took my job, my kitchen, my cart. What's money compared to that? Lynn's expression was unreadable. Besides, It's not charity. It's an investment. If Wade keeps that ranch, he'll need supplies. I can provide them at a fair price. Everyone benefits. Clara wrapped her hands around the teacup, feeling the warmth seep into her blistered palms. Even if you gave us 300, we'd still be 500 short. There's no way to raise that much in 17 days. Then we need to think differently. Lynn sat down across from her. The town owes Wade. They just don't know it yet. What do you mean? After Maria died, people said terrible things. But before that, Wade and Maria helped half the families in Dust Hollow, fixed wagons, doctored sick livestock, gave food when people were short. They never asked for anything back. Lynn's voice was firm. It's time to remind people of their debts. You think they'll help after everything? Some will, some won't. But we only need enough to make the difference. Lynn pulled out a piece of paper and started writing names. The Johnsons, Wade helped birth their calf last spring. The Martins, Maria taught their daughter to read. The widow Chen, Wade fixed her roof for free after the storm. Clara watched the list grow. 15 names, 20. Families that owed the Mercers something, even if they'd forgotten it in the rush to judgment after Maria died. What if Elias finds out? Clara asked. What if he threatens these families? Then they'll have to decide what matters more, Elias Reed's approval or their own integrity. Lynn handed Clara the list. You can't make that choice for them, but you can give them the opportunity to make it. Clara folded the paper and tucked it into her pocket. When do we start? Tonight, after dinner service. Lynn stood up and pulled out her apron. But first you need to eat something that isn't trail rations and sleep in an actual bed. You're no good to anyone if you collapse. Clara wanted to argue, but her body was already betraying her, hands shaking from exhaustion, vision going soft at the edges. She let Lynn feed her eggs and rice and something with ginger that made her stomach settle for the first time in days. She fell asleep in her old room and didn't wake up until dusk, her body making up for 4 nights of fitful dozing in a chair. When she came downstairs, the dinner rush was ending and Elias Reed was sitting at his usual table. Claire's first instinct was to turn around and leave through the back. But she'd spent 3 days expecting his hired men to come back and burn Wade's barn. She'd slept with a rifle and jumped at shadows. She was done being afraid of Elias Reed. She walked to his table and refilled his water glass without being asked. Miss Whitmore, Elias said, his voice pleasant in a way that made Clara's skin crawl. I heard you've taken up residence at the Mercer Ranch. How domestic. I'm keeping a dying man alive. If that bothers your sense of propriety, that's your problem. It doesn't bother me at all. I'm simply concerned for your reputation. Elias cut into his steak with precise movements. Although I suppose reputation isn't something you value highly, given your circumstances. My circumstances are that I'm doing honest work for honest pay. What are your circumstances, Mr. Reed? Elias's knife paused. I'm not sure I follow. Your circumstances are that you tried to have Wade's barn burned down and it didn't work. Your circumstances are that a dying man ran off your hired thugs with a rifle and a bad leg. Clara leaned in close enough that only Elias could hear her. Your circumstances are that you're losing, and everyone in this town is starting to notice. Elias's face went tight. He set down his knife with deliberate care. Those are dangerous accusations. They're not accusations. They're observations. Clara straightened up. Will there be anything else? Just one thing. Elias's voice dropped to a whisper. You should know that I visited the bank this morning. Asked them to move up the auction date. They agreed. The Mercer Ranch goes on the block in 10 days, not 20. Clara's stomach dropped. They can't do that. They can when I'm holding half their outstanding loans, and I make a compelling case about property deterioration. Elias smiled. 10 days, Miss Whitmore. I hope you've been saving your pennies. He left coins on the table and walked out. Clara stood there holding the water pitcher and trying not to let her hands shake. Lynn appeared at her elbow. What did he say? He moved up the auction. We have 10 days instead of 20. Lynn's expression went dark. That bastard. He knows we were gathering support. He's trying to cut off our timeline. It's working. Clara set down the pitcher before she dropped it. Even if we collect from everyone on that list tonight, there's no way we'll have enough time to raise $800 in 10 days. Then we don't raise $800. We raise enough to make Elias pay more than he wants to. Lynn pulled off her apron. Close up the restaurant. We have visits to make. They started with the Johnsons, who lived 2 miles outside town in a house that was more patch than original structure. Mrs. Johnson opened the door with a baby on her hip and suspicion in her eyes. "Madam Lynn," she said carefully. "Clara, what brings you out here?" "We're collecting for Wade Mercer," Lynn said without preamble. "His ranch is being auctioned in 10 days. We're asking the families he's helped over the years to contribute what they can." Mrs. Johnson's face shuddered. "I heard he's dying." "He was dying. He's getting better." Clara stepped forward. "Your calf last spring, the one born breech. Wade spent 6 hours helping you save it. Without him, you would have lost both the calf and the mother." "I remember." Mrs. Johnson shifted the baby to her other hip. "But my husband says we can't afford to make enemies of Elias Reed. He buys most of our cattle. And Wade asked nothing when he saved your livestock," Clara said. "He didn't charge you. Didn't expect repayment. Just helped because it needed doing." Mrs. Johnson looked away. "I'm sorry, I truly am, but we have our own family to think about." The door closed. Clara and Lynn stood on the porch in the growing darkness. "One down," Lynn said quietly. 14 to go. The Martins were next. They lived in town above their dry goods store, and Mr. Martin met them at the door with apologetic eyes. "I can't be seen supporting Wade Mercer," he said before they could speak. "Half my customers think he should have left town after Maria died. If I give you money, I lose their business." "Maria taught your daughter to read," Clara said, "for free, every Tuesday for 6 months. I know." Mr. Martin's voice was pained. "I know what we owe. But I have a business to run, a family to feed. I can't. I'm sorry." Another door closed, another debt unpaid. They visited 9 families that night, 9 families that owed the Mercers everything from repaired roofs to doctored children to food during hard winters. 9 families that apologized and closed their doors and chose safety over honor. By the time they reached the widow Chen's small house on the edge of town, Clara was ready to give up. Mrs. Chen answered the door with flour on her hands and questions in her eyes. She listened to their request without interrupting. Then she disappeared inside and came back with a small cloth bag. $63, she said, pressing it into Clara's hands. "It's everything I have saved. Wade fixed my roof when I was 3 months behind on rent, and the landlord was threatening to evict me. He said I could pay him back when I had it. I never did." Her eyes were wet. "This doesn't cover what I owe him, but it's what I can give." Clara stared at the bag. $63 was more than she'd made in 3 months at Lynn's restaurant. It was everything this woman had, and she was giving it to a man who'd never asked for repayment. "Mrs. Chen, we can't take all your savings," Clara said. "You have to. I can't live with myself if Wade loses his ranch because I was too scared to help." Mrs. Chen gripped Clara's hands. "My son is in San Francisco. He sends money when he can. I'll manage. But Wade saved my home. It's right that I try to save his." They left with $63 and tears in their eyes. The next family gave them $12. The one after that gave $5 and a basket of preserved food. A young couple Wade had helped through a difficult childbirth gave $20 they couldn't afford and a promise to pray for Wade's recovery. By midnight, they'd visited every name on Lynn's list. They'd been turned away by more families than had helped. But the ones who did help gave everything they could. Clara and Lynn counted the money on Lynn's kitchen table in the early morning hours. $247. Combined with Lynn's savings, they had $530 total. Still, $270 short, with 9 days left. "It's not enough," Clara said, exhaustion making her voice flat. "No, but it's more than we had yesterday." Lynn scooped the money into a secure box. "And we have 9 more days to find the rest." "How?" "We've already asked everyone who might help." Clara put her head in her hands. "Elias is going to win. He's going to take Wade's ranch, and there's nothing we can do to stop him." "Then we'll make him pay every cent it's worth," Lynn said firmly. $530 means he can't steal it. He has to buy it at a fair price. That's still a victory." "It's not victory. It's just expensive defeat." Lynn was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Go back to Wade tomorrow. Tell him what we've raised. Let him decide what to do with it." Clara rode back to the ranch at dawn with $530 in a satchel and no idea how to tell Wade they'd failed. The morning was cold, unusual for Texas, and the sky was the color of old bruises. Wade was outside when she arrived, leaning on his cane and checking the fence Clara had mended. He turned when he heard the cart, his face lighting up in a way that made Clara's chest hurt. "You're back," he said. "I was starting to think you'd finally decided I wasn't worth the trouble." "Still worth the trouble." "Barely." Clara climbed down from the cart and handed him the satchel. "We raised money. Lynn and I spent the last 2 days collecting from families you and Maria helped." Wade opened the satchel. His hands stilled when he saw how much was inside. "This is... Clara, this is more than I expected, more than I deserved." "It's not enough." Clara's voice cracked. "We're still 270 short, and the auction is in 9 days because Elias convinced the bank to move it up." Wade was quiet, his hands resting on the satchel. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "This money, $530. That's enough to start over somewhere else. Buy a small piece of land. Build something new. You're not starting over. You're keeping this ranch." "With what?" "We can't raise another 270 in 9 days. We both know it." Wade met her eyes. "Maybe it's time to accept that some fights can't be won." "No." Clara's voice was hard. "We didn't come this far to give up now. There has to be another way." "There isn't. I've been going over it in my head all night." Wade's jaw was tight. "Even if I could work, which I can't, not really, there's no money to be made before the auction, no crops to sell, no cattle worth selling, nothing." "Then we'll find another way." "How?" Wade's frustration finally broke through. "How, Clara? You've already done everything possible. You've nursed me back from death, fixed my fences, collected money from people who owed me nothing. What else is there?" Clara didn't have an answer. She stood there in the cold morning air, with failure sitting heavy in her chest and no words to push it away. Wade stepped closer, his cane pressing into the dirt. "You need to let this go. Let me lose the ranch. Take this money and do something good with it. Something that isn't tied to a broken down place and a broken down man." "You're not broken down." "Yes, I am. I'll always limp. I'll always be the man whose Mexican wife died and who drank himself halfway to the grave afterward. This ranch will always be the place where I lost everything that mattered." Wade's voice was raw. "Maybe Elias is right. Maybe it's better off in someone else's hands." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to find the right words to make Wade see what she saw. A man who'd fought his way back from death, a ranch that was worth saving, a future that was still possible if they just refused to quit. But she was too tired, too defeated. And maybe Wade was right. Maybe some fights really couldn't be won. "I need to think," Clara said finally. "I'm going to walk. You should rest." She left before Wade could respond, walking away from the ranch house toward the creek that marked the eastern boundary of Wade's property. The water was low from the dry season, barely more than a trickle over smooth stones. Clara sat on the bank and tried to figure out where everything had gone wrong. They'd done everything right. Wade was alive. The ranch was holding together. They'd raised more money than seemed possible, and it still wasn't enough. She was still sitting there an hour later when she heard footsteps behind her. Not Wade's uneven gait, but something lighter. Clara turned to find Madame Lynn walking toward her with purpose. "How did you know where I was?" Clara asked. "Wade said you went to the creek. There's only one creek." Lynn sat down beside her. "He also said you looked like you wanted to throw yourself in it." The thought crossed my mind. "Good. Means you're still thinking." Lynn was quiet for a moment. "I have an idea. You won't like it." "I don't like anything right now. Tell me anyway." "I can cover the rest of the debt," Lynn said. "All of it. The 270, plus enough to give Wade operating capital for the next year." Clara's head snapped up. "What? How?" "I've been saving for 20 years, living small, spending nothing. I have almost $2,000 hidden in my restaurant." Lynn's voice was matter of fact. "I was saving it to buy my building outright, but I can do that later. Wade needs it now." "Lynn, that's your entire life savings." "Yes, and I'm choosing to spend it on someone who actually matters." Lynn turned to face Clara directly. "But there's a condition. Wade can't know it came from me. As far as he's concerned, you raised it. All of it." "Why?" "Because Wade's pride will never accept charity from me. He'll see it as pity, as debt, as something he can never repay. It'll poison everything. Lynn's expression was firm, but if he thinks you somehow pulled off a miracle, that a bunch of strangers contributed because they believed in him, that's something he can live with. Clara shook her head. I can't lie to him like that. It's not a lie. It's a strategy. Lynn stood up and brushed dirt from her skirt. The money comes from people who cared about him and Maria. I cared about them. Therefore, I qualify. The math is simple. The math is a technicality, and you know it. So is this entire situation. Lynn's voice softened. Clara, I'm not doing this for Wade alone. I'm doing it for you. You fought harder for this than anyone had a right to ask. You deserve to win. I don't want to win with your life savings. Then what do you want? To watch Elias Reed take this ranch? To see Wade lose everything because we were $200 short? Lynn gripped Clara's shoulders. Sometimes victory requires accepting help you don't think you've earned. This is one of those times. Clara thought about Wade's face this morning, about the resignation in his voice when he said maybe some fights can't be won, about the way he was already preparing himself for loss. She thought about Elias Reed's smile when he told her about moving up the auction, about those hired men trying to burn Wade's barn, about every cruel word and calculated cruelty that had brought them to this moment. If I do this, Clara said slowly, if I take your money and lie about where it came from, I'm no better than Elias, using people for my own purposes. No, you're nothing like Elias. Lynn's voice was fierce. Elias uses people and discards them. You're trying to save someone who matters. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. And someday you'll understand that. Lynn released Clara's shoulders. I'm going back to town. I'll bring the money tomorrow morning, early, before the bank opens. What you do with it is your choice. But Clara, Wade deserves to keep his home, and you deserve to be the one who makes that possible. Lynn left. Clara sat by the creek until the sun was high and her thoughts had gone in circles so many times she couldn't tell right from wrong anymore. Finally, she walked back to the ranch house. Wade was on the porch, whittling something from a piece of scrap wood. His hand stilled when he saw her face. What happened? He asked. Clara sat down beside him. I need to tell you something, and you need to not interrupt until I'm done. Wade set down his knife. All right. When I came to this town, I had nothing. Nowhere to go, no prospects, no future worth mentioning. I was ready to crawl back to Boston and spend the rest of my life being grateful for scraps from people who resented me. Clara's voice was steady. Then you gave me a reason to stay. Not because you needed saving, though you did, but because saving you meant proving something to myself. Wade started to speak, but Clara held up her hand. I'm not finished. These past weeks, working this ranch, fighting for every inch of progress, collecting money from people who barely remembered your name, it's the first time in my life I've felt like I was doing something that mattered, something real. Clara looked at Wade directly. If we lose this ranch, I lose that. I lose the proof that I'm capable of more than survival. Clara, so I'm going to the auction in 9 days. I'm going to bid against Elias Reed with every dollar we've raised. And I'm going to keep bidding until either we win or the money runs out. Clara's jaw was set. And if you try to stop me, I will tie you to that bed with your own bandages and go anyway. Understand? Wade stared at her. Then, slowly, he smiled. It was the first real smile Clara had seen from him, and it changed his entire face. You're terrifying, he said. Good. Maybe that'll keep you alive. Clara stood up. Now finish whatever you're carving and get some rest. We have 9 days to prepare for war. The days leading up to the auction moved both too fast and too slow. Clara spent her time getting the ranch into the best shape possible, working until her hands bled and her back screamed. Wade helped where he could, his strength returning in increments that were both encouraging and heartbreaking. Every step he took without his cane was a victory, but every grimace of pain was a reminder of how much he'd lost. On the 8th day, Madame Lynn arrived at dawn with a leather satchel that looked like it had been hidden for decades. She handed it to Clara without ceremony. $290, Lynn said. 20 more than you needed, just in case. Clara held the satchel and tried to find words for what she was feeling. Gratitude, guilt, determination, fear, all of it tangled together until she couldn't separate one from the other. Thank you, she managed finally. Don't thank me. Win. Lynn's eyes were hard. And when you do, remember that Elias Reed made this personal. He doesn't get to walk away from this unscathed." Clara nodded. Lynn left, and Clara walked into Wade's house with $820 in a satchel and a lie on her tongue that she'd have to maintain forever. Wade was awake, sitting at the table with coffee that was barely more than hot water with grounds in it. He looked up when Clara entered. "That was Lynn?" he asked. "Yes. She brought the last of the money." Clara set the satchel on the table. $820 total, enough to buy the ranch and have operating capital left over. Wade opened the satchel and stared at the money like it might disappear if he looked away. "How did you—" "All those families we asked said no. Where did this come from?" This was the moment. The lie Clara had been preparing for days. She took a breath and committed. Some of them changed their minds. After they heard Elias moved up the auction date, people started showing up at Lynn's restaurant. A few dollars here, a few dollars there. They didn't want to be seen helping you publicly, but they couldn't live with themselves if they did nothing. Clara met Wade's eyes and held them. "You and Maria helped a lot of people, more than you realized. This is them paying that forward." It was close enough to true that Clara could almost believe it herself. Wade had helped those families. The money did come from someone who cared. The specifics were just adjusted. Wade's eyes were wet. He pressed his hands flat on the table like he was trying to keep himself grounded. "I don't deserve this." "Yes, you do. You helped people when they needed it. They're returning the favor." Clara's voice was firm. "Tomorrow, we go to that auction, and we're going to watch Elias Reed's face when he realizes he can't buy your ranch for pennies." Wade looked up at her, and something in his expression made Clara's breath catch. "Why are you doing this? Really? Not the reasons you told me before. The real reason." Clara thought about lying again, about deflecting. But Wade deserved at least one truth today. "Because when I look at this ranch, I don't see failure. I see possibility. And when I look at you, I don't see a man who's broken. I see a man who's healing." Clara's voice was soft. "And I haven't felt hopeful about anything in years. I'm not ready to give that up yet." Wade stood slowly, leaning on the table for support. He crossed the small room and took Clara's hands in his. They were rough from ranch work, scarred in places where infection had tried to take hold, but they were warm and alive and steady. "Tomorrow," Wade said, "we go to war." "Tomorrow," Clara agreed. That night, Clara lay in her chair bed and listened to Wade's breathing even out into sleep. The satchel with the money sat on the table between them, and Clara's conscience sat heavy in her chest. She'd lied. She'd taken Madame Lynn's life savings under false pretenses. She'd manipulated Wade's gratitude and hope to serve her own need for purpose. But tomorrow, Wade would keep his ranch. Tomorrow, Elias Reed would lose. Tomorrow, Clara would prove that the woman abandoned on a train platform was capable of miracles. And if those miracles were built on lies? Well, Clara had learned long ago that survival rarely came without compromise. This was just one more necessary evil in a long line of them. Outside, the Texas wind howled. Inside, Clara Whitmore closed her eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. The morning of the auction arrived with unseasonable rain, fat drops hammering the ranch house roof like accusations. Clara woke before dawn with her stomach in knots and the leather satchel clutched against her chest like a shield she didn't deserve to carry. Wade was already awake, dressed in clothes Clara had washed and mended until they looked almost respectable. His hands shook as he buttoned his shirt. "I can't remember the last time I was this nervous," he said. "Try being abandoned on a train platform in front of an entire town," Clara replied, forcing lightness into her voice. "This is nothing compared to that." Wade turned to look at her. "You know that's not true." "No, but lying to myself has gotten me this far. Might as well keep going." Clara stood and smoothed her dress, the same blue one she'd worn off the train, now faded and patched in places no amount of mending could hide. "How's the leg?" "Hurts, but it'll hold." Wade picked up his cane. "Clara, if this doesn't work—" "It'll work." Clara's voice was harder than she intended. "It has to." They rode into town in Madame Lynn's cart, the rain turning the road to mud that sucked at the wheels. Wade sat rigid beside Clara, one hand gripping the satchel, the other white-knuckled on his cane. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said in the past 3 weeks of bandages and fence mending and desperate hope. The auction was being held at the town hall, a building Clara had never been inside. When they arrived, a crowd was already gathering despite the rain, townspeople drawn by the promise of spectacle, ranchers interested in the water rights, and Elias Reed standing near the front with his arms crossed and certainty written across his face. His eyes found Clara the moment she stepped through the door. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, that she'd actually shown up. Then it hardened into the familiar contempt Clara had seen on the train platform. "Miss Whitmore," he said, loud enough for the room to hear, "I didn't expect to see you here. Surely you understand this is a serious business matter, not entertainment for—" "For what?" Clara cut him off. "For women who don't know their place? For outsiders who should have taken your advice and left town?" She walked further into the room, Wade limping beside her. "I understand perfectly well what this is. It's a land auction, and we're here to bid." A murmur ran through the crowd. Elias's smile was razor thin. "With what money? I heard you were collecting donations like some kind of charity case." "We have $820, Wade said quietly, his voice carrying in the hushed room. "More than enough to meet the bank's requirements." The murmur turned into shocked whispers. Clara watched Elias's face carefully and saw the moment he realized this wasn't going to be the easy victory he'd planned. $800, Elias repeated. "That's convenient. Where exactly did a dying drunk and a rejected mail-order bride get that kind of money?" "From people who remember kindness," Clara said. "Something you wouldn't understand." Pastor Hendricks stepped forward, his expression troubled. "Now, let's all remain civil. This is a legal proceeding, not a personal dispute." "Isn't it, though?" Clara looked around the room. "Half these people watched Elias Reed abandon me on a train platform. The other half stood by while Wade Mercer nearly died alone because his wife was Mexican. This has always been personal." The room went silent. Wade's hand found Clara's elbow, a gentle warning, but she shook him off. "You want to know where the money came from?" Clara continued. "It came from the widow Chen, who gave everything she had because Wade fixed her roof for free. It came from the Donnellys, who Wade helped through a difficult childbirth. It came from a dozen families who remembered that Wade and Maria Mercer helped people without asking for anything in return." She paused, looking directly at Elias. "It came from people who understand the difference between buying respect and earning it." Elias's face was red now, angry spots of color high on his cheeks. "You think $800 is enough? I can bid more than that before breakfast." "Then do it," Clara said. "Show everyone here exactly how badly you want to steal a dead woman's home." The banker cleared his throat from behind his small desk at the front of the room. "If we're ready to begin, the starting bid for the Mercer property is $800, representing the outstanding debt plus fees." "800, Wade said immediately. "850, Elias countered without hesitation. Clara's stomach dropped. They had $20 of cushion. That was it. $870, Wade said, his voice steady despite the way his hand trembled on the satchel. $900, Elias said, and there was smugness in his tone now. He knew he had them, knew they were almost out of money. Wade looked at Clara. She could see the defeat starting to creep into his expression, the resignation that they'd come this close and still failed. Then a voice came from the back of the room. $1,000. Everyone turned. Madame Lynn stood in the doorway, rain dripping from her black umbrella, her face composed and utterly calm. She walked forward through the crowd like she owned the building. "I'm sorry," the banker said, confused. "Who are you?" "Madame Lynn. I run the restaurant on Market Street." Lynn's voice was clear. "And I'm bidding $1,000 for the Mercer property." Clara's mind went blank. Wade actually took a step back, his cane scraping against the floor. Elias recovered first. "This is absurd. She can't just— What possible interest does a Chinese restaurant owner have in ranch land?" "The same interest anyone has in property," Lynn said calmly. "Investment, future security. The water rights alone are worth twice what you're offering." "You don't have that kind of money," Elias said flatly. Lynn reached into her coat and pulled out a thick envelope. 20 years of savings. Would you like to count it, or should we let the banker handle that?" The banker took the envelope with shaking hands. The room watched in silence as he counted, his lips moving silently. Finally, he looked up. $1,000 confirmed. Elias's face had gone from red to pale. 1,100. 1,200, Lynn said without hesitation. This is ridiculous. Elias slammed his hand on a nearby table. She's obviously been put up to this by Wade and Miss Whitmore. This is fraud. Fraud? Lynn's voice was ice. Or is it just that you can't stand losing to a woman, especially a Chinese woman who you've spent 20 years trying to run out of town? Pastor Hendricks stepped forward again. Perhaps we should verify Miss Lynn's intentions. It does seem unusual. What's unusual is that you're questioning my right to bid while Elias Reed has been trying to steal this property for years, Lynn interrupted. I have cash money. The auction is legal. Are you going to let him intimidate you into rejecting my bid? The banker looked between Lynn and Elias, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. The bid is legal, he said finally. $1,200. Mr. Reed? Elias's jaw was clenched so tight Clara could see the muscle jumping. 1,300. 1,400, Lynn said immediately. The crowd was riveted now, heads swiveling between Lynn and Elias like they were watching a prize fight. Clara stood frozen, trying to understand what was happening. This wasn't the plan. Lynn was supposed to give them money secretly. She wasn't supposed to bid herself, wasn't supposed to expose her entire savings in front of the whole town. 1,500, Elias ground out. 2,000, Lynn said, and the room gasped. Elias went absolutely still. $2,000 was more than the ranch was worth by any reasonable measure, more than he could justify spending even with his resources, and everyone in the room knew it. $2,000? The banker repeated weakly. Mr. Reed, do you wish to counter? Elias looked around the room, at the faces watching him, at Wade standing pale and shocked, at Clara with her hand over her mouth, at Madame Lynn with her umbrella and her calm expression and her complete refusal to back down. No, he said finally, the word forced through gritted teeth. I don't. The banker's gavel came down. Sold to Madame Lynn for $2,000. The room erupted, people talking over each other, some shocked, some delighted, some clearly furious that the town spectacle hadn't ended the way they'd expected. But Clara couldn't hear any of it over the rushing in her ears. Lynn had just bought Wade's ranch, had spent her entire life savings plus money Clara didn't even know she had done it publicly, in front of everyone, destroying any chance of the lie Clara had told holding up. Wade was already moving toward Lynn, his cane forgotten, limping badly but moving fast. What did you just do? I bought a ranch, Lynn said calmly. Good investment, water rights, decent grazing land. I'll make a profit eventually. You spent everything, Wade said, his voice cracking. 20 years of savings. For me. Not for you. For Maria. Lynn's composure finally cracked slightly. She was my friend, the only real friend I had in this town. When people tried to burn my restaurant, she stood in front of it with a shotgun until they left. She taught me English when everyone else wanted me gone. Lynn stopped, swallowing hard. You and Maria helped me survive here. This is me returning that favor. But the ranch, Wade said helplessly. I can't pay you back $2,000. I can barely keep the place running. Then we'll make an arrangement. Lynn's voice was businesslike again. You run the ranch. I own the land. We split profits. You get to stay in the home you built with Maria. I get a return on my investment eventually. Everyone wins. Everyone except Elias Reed, who was standing near the door looking like he'd swallowed something poisonous. His eyes found Clara's across the room, and the hatred there was so pure it was almost physical. This isn't over, he said quietly, meant only for her. Yes, it is, Clara replied. You lost, in front of everyone, and now they all know exactly who you are. Elias turned and walked out. Two of his companions followed. The third hesitated, then approached Wade instead. I'm sorry, the man said quietly. About Maria. About everything. We should have done better. Wade just nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. The crowd began to disperse, people filing out into the rain with plenty to gossip about. Clara stood rooted in place, her mind trying to catch up with what had just happened. Lynn had lied to her, had told Clara she was giving them money to bid with, when really she'd been planning to bid herself all along. Had let Clara believe she was saving Wade's ranch, when in reality Lynn had been preparing to do it herself. Clara should have been relieved, should have been grateful. Should have been anything except the hollow, angry confusion spreading through her chest. "Why?" she asked when the room had mostly cleared. "Why didn't you tell me you were planning to bid?" Lynn looked at her steadily. "Because if I'd told you, you would have tried to stop me, would have argued that it was too much, that I was sacrificing too much, and we would have wasted time we didn't have." "You made me lie to Wade," Clara said. "Made me tell him the money came from townspeople when it came from you. Made you what? Feel like a hero?" Lynn's voice was sharp now. "You wanted to save Wade's ranch. I saved it. The method is irrelevant." "The method is everything," Clara's voice rose. "I spent the last 2 days telling Wade that people believed in him, that they valued what he and Maria did. And now he finds out it was all a lie, that it was just you spending money out of guilt over his dead wife." "It wasn't guilt," Lynn said quietly. "It was love. Maria was like a daughter to me. Saving her husband's home was the last thing I could do for her." Wade had been listening to this exchange with growing horror. "Clara lied to me about the money?" "I asked her to," Lynn said before Clara could respond. "I gave her the money and told her to say it came from the families you helped. I thought it would be easier for you to accept." "Easier?" Wade's voice was raw. "You thought lying to me would be easier? Making me think people actually cared when it was just—" "Some of them did care," Clara broke in. "The widow Chen gave $63. The Donnellys gave $20. Others contributed. Not enough, but they tried." "And you decided I couldn't handle knowing that?" Wade looked between them. "Decided I was too fragile to hear the truth?" "You were dying," Clara said desperately. "You were ready to give up. I needed you to believe people wanted you to survive. So you lied." Wade's face was pale. "You both lied. And now I'm standing here realizing that everything I thought about the past few weeks was built on false hope." "It kept you alive," Lynn said. "That's not false." "No, but it's not real either." Wade grabbed his cane and headed for the door. "I need air." Clara started to follow, but Lynn caught her arm. "Let him go. He needs time to process this." "He hates me now," Clara said, and her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "I lied to him. Made him believe something beautiful when it was just manipulation. You did what you thought was necessary to save his life." Lynn's grip tightened. "Sometimes kindness requires deception. Sometimes the truth is less important than the outcome." "I don't believe that," Clara said. "I can't believe that." "Then you're more naive than I thought." Lynn released her arm. "Wade will forgive you eventually, or he won't. But either way, his ranch is saved. He gets to keep his home. That matters more than his hurt feelings." Clara pulled away. "You're wrong. It all matters. The lies matter. The manipulation matters. We don't get to decide that our intentions excuse the damage we cause." She left before Lynn could respond, stepping out into the rain that was finally starting to ease. Wade was nowhere in sight. Probably had headed back to the ranch, to the home that wasn't really his anymore, but was somehow still his because Madame Lynn had decided to be generous in the most humiliating way possible. Clara walked through Dust Hollow with no destination in mind, past the train station where this had all started, past the general store where Elias had given his speeches about respectability, past the restaurant where she'd learned to survive on spite and stubbornness. She ended up at the creek behind the town, the same one that eventually flowed through Wade's property. The rain had swollen it beyond the trickle she remembered, water rushing over rocks with something close to violence. Clara sat on the bank and let herself cry for the first time since arriving in Texas. Not quiet tears, but ugly, shaking sobs that hurt her chest and made her nose run. She cried for Wade's trust that she'd broken, for Madame Lynn's savings that were gone forever, for the lies she'd told herself that she was doing something noble instead of just feeding her own need to matter. She was still sitting there when footsteps approached behind her. Clara didn't turn around, didn't have the energy to care who'd found her. "You're getting soaked," Wade's voice said. Clara laughed, bitter and sharp. "Good. Maybe I'll catch pneumonia and you can return the favor of nursing me back to health." Wade sat down beside her, his bad leg extended stiffly. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the creek rage. "Lynn told me something after you left," Wade said eventually. "About Maria. About how she used to say that truth without kindness was just cruelty dressed up as honesty." Clara didn't respond. "Maria was right about a lot of things," Wade continued, "but I think she was wrong about that. Because kindness without truth is just manipulation. And I've had enough of being managed by people who think they know better than me about my own life. I'm sorry, Clara said, and meant it. I should have told you the truth about the money. Should have trusted you to handle it. Yes, you should have. Wade's voice wasn't angry, just tired. But I understand why you didn't. You thought I was too broken to hear that most people had chosen Elias over me, that only a handful actually cared enough to help. You're not broken. No, but I was. For months after Maria died, I was exactly as broken as everyone said, drowning in whiskey and grief and not caring if I lived or died. Wade looked at her. You changed that, not with lies, but with showing up, with refusing to leave, with working yourself bloody to fix fences and clean wounds and make me eat when I wanted to starve. Clara's throat was tight. That doesn't excuse the lying. No, but it explains it. Wade was quiet for a moment. I'm angry that you lied. I'm hurt that Lynn spent her entire savings on something I can never repay. But I'm also alive. And my ranch, or Lynn's ranch, or whatever it is now, is still standing. That counts for something. Does it? Clara asked. Or did we just trade one kind of defeat for another? Wade considered that. I don't know yet. Ask me in a year when I've had time to figure out what living with the consequences feels like. They sat until the rain stopped and the sky started to clear, revealing a sunset that was almost obscene in its beauty, all orange and purple, like the day was apologizing for itself. What happens now? Clara asked finally. Now I go back to the ranch and figure out how to run a place I don't technically own anymore, Wade said. And you, what will you do? Clara hadn't thought about that. Hadn't let herself think past the auction, past saving Wade's ranch, past proving she could do something that mattered. I don't know, she admitted. Go back to Lynn's restaurant, I guess. Work until I've saved enough to move on somewhere else. Or, Wade said carefully, you could stay at the ranch. Help me run it. Lynn and I will need someone who knows how to work hard and lie convincingly. Clara looked at him sharply. Wade's expression was neutral, but there was something in his eyes that might have been hope. You want me to stay? Clara asked. After everything? I want you to consider it. We work well together. You know the ranch almost as well as I do at this point, and Wade paused. I've gotten used to having you around. Don't particularly want to go back to being alone. Clara's chest did something complicated. That's not a good reason to keep someone around. Maybe not, but it's an honest one. Wade stood up slowly, testing his bad leg. Think about it. No pressure, but the offer stands. He limped away, leaving Clara sitting by the creek with too many thoughts and no clear path forward. She went back to the restaurant as evening fell. Madame Lynn was in the kitchen, preparing for dinner service like nothing world-changing had happened that afternoon. Wade talked to you, Lynn said without looking up. He offered me a job at the ranch, Clara replied. Partnership, maybe. I'm not sure. Will you take it? I don't know. Clara sat down heavily. Lynn, why did you really bid on that ranch? And don't tell me it was just about Maria. There's something else. Lynn was quiet for a long time. Then she set down her knife and turned to face Clara. When I came to this country, I had nothing. My husband died 6 months after we arrived, leaving me with a restaurant I didn't know how to run and a town that wanted me gone. Lynn's voice was steady, but her eyes were distant. Maria Mercer was the first person who treated me like a human being instead of a problem to solve. She taught me English, protected me from people who wanted to drive me out, made me believe I had a right to exist in this place. And when she died? Clara asked quietly. When she died, I realized I'd spent 20 years building walls to protect myself, keeping everyone at distance, trusting no one because trust meant vulnerability. Lynn's expression was complicated. Then you showed up, abandoned and angry and refusing to quit, and I saw Maria in you, that same stubborn determination to survive in a place that didn't want you. Clara felt something shift in her chest. So buying the ranch was about me? Buying the ranch was about all of us, about Wade keeping his home, about you finding a purpose, about me finally doing something with my money besides hoarding it against disasters that never come. Lynn met Clara's eyes. I'm 71 years old. I've spent 2 decades surviving. Maybe it's time I tried actually living. By spending everything you have? Money isn't living. It's just the cost of admission. Lynn turned back to her prep work. Wade needs help. You need a home. I need to know that Maria's legacy isn't just a dead woman's memory. We can all give each other what we need. That's not manipulation. That's just how family works. We're not family, Clara said automatically. Aren't we? Lynn's voice was soft. You've lived in my house for weeks, worked in my kitchen, fought for someone I loved because I asked you to. If that's not family, what is? Clara didn't have an answer to that. She helped Lynn with dinner service, moving through the familiar motions of cooking and serving and cleaning while her mind spun in circles. Elias Reed didn't come in that night. Neither did most of his usual companions. The restaurant was quieter than normal, filled with people who kept glancing at Clara like she might explode into something dangerous. Late that night, after the last customer had left and the kitchen was clean, Clara made a decision. She packed her few belongings into the same battered suitcase she'd brought off the train. Wrote a note for Lynn that said simply, "Thank you for everything. I'll pay you back someday." See. Then she walked to the train station in the dark, ready to buy a ticket to anywhere that wasn't Dust Hollow, Texas. The station was empty except for the night clerk, who looked up in surprise when Clara entered. "Next train east leaves at dawn," he said. $3 for a ticket to—" "I know," Clara interrupted. But she didn't ask for a ticket. Instead, she stood there in the empty station and thought about the last time she'd been here, abandoned and humiliated and convinced she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. She thought about Wade's face when he'd offered her a partnership, about Madam Lynn saying, "That's just how family works," about the ranch that still needed fixing and the future that was terrifying but possible. She thought about her brothers in Boston who'd be unsurprised that she'd failed, about the train platform where Elias Reed had looked at her like garbage, about every moment in the past weeks where she could have quit and hadn't. "Actually," Clara said slowly, "I don't need a ticket." She turned and walked back out into the night, past the restaurant where Lynn was probably still working, past the general store and the church and the houses full of people who'd watched her get abandoned and laughed. She walked the 4 miles to Wade's ranch in the dark, her suitcase banging against her leg with every step. Her feet were blistered by the time she arrived, and she was damp with sweat despite the cool night air. Wade was on the porch, like he'd been waiting. He stood when he saw her. "You came back," he said. "I'm an idiot," Claire replied. "I was halfway to buying a train ticket when I realized I'd just be running again, and I'm tired of running." Wade came down the porch steps, his limp pronounced in the dim light. "So you're staying?" "I'm staying, but we need rules." Clara set down her suitcase. "No more lies. Not from me, not from you, not from Lynn. If we're doing this, partnership, family, whatever this is, we do it honestly." "Agreed," Wade said. "What else?" "I get equal say in ranch decisions. Not because I own the land, I don't, but because I'm putting in equal work." Clara held up her blistered hands. "These earn me a voice." "Fair enough. And one more thing." Clara's voice softened. "We remember Maria. We honor what she built here. But we don't live in her shadow. This ranch moves forward, not backward." Wade was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Deal." They shook hands there in the moonlight, sealing a partnership that was built on lies and truth and desperation and hope in equal measure. The next 2 years were the hardest work Clara had ever done. Harder than her father's butcher shop. Harder than keeping her brothers fed on nothing. Harder than anything she'd imagined when she'd stepped off that train expecting a wedding. She and Wade rebuilt the ranch piece by piece, fixed fences that collapsed in storms, nursed cattle through sickness, planted crops that failed and tried again. Wade's leg healed crooked, leaving him with a permanent limp, but his hands were steady and his determination matched Clara's exactly. Madam Lynn visited once a month, checking on her investment with the careful eye of someone who'd earned every cent through brutal work. She and Wade eventually settled on a profit-sharing arrangement that was fair to both of them, though Lynn insisted Wade keep the lion's share. "I don't need money," she told Clara during one visit. "I need to know Maria's home is thriving. That's payment enough." The town's opinion shifted slowly. Some people never forgave Clara for her public confrontation with Elias Reed. Others grudgingly admitted that maybe she'd been right about a few things. The widow Chen became a regular visitor, bringing preserves and gossip in equal measure. Elias Reed himself disappeared 6 months after the auction. Some said he'd moved to Austin. Others claimed he'd lost his ranch to bad investments and skipped town to avoid creditors. Clara didn't particularly care which story was true. She was too busy living to waste energy on his failure. On a warm evening in late spring, 2 years after the auction, Clara was on the porch mending a bridle when Wade came out with 2 glasses of something that wasn't quite whiskey, but wasn't quite water either. "Lynn's home brew," he explained, handing her a glass. "She says it'll either cure what ails you or kill you quick. Either way, you won't complain." Clara laughed and took a sip. It burned going down but left a pleasant warmth. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over land that was both theirs and not theirs, in ways that had stopped mattering. "I've been thinking," Wade said eventually, "about what you said that first night you came back. About remembering Maria but moving forward." And I think I'm ready to move forward." Wade's voice was careful. "Not forgetting. Never forgetting. But maybe making space for something new." Clara's heart did something complicated in her chest. "What kind of something new?" Wade turned to look at her. "The kind where I admit that somewhere in the past 2 years of working ourselves half to death, I started thinking of you as more than a business partner." Clara set down her glass because her hands were suddenly shaking. "Wade, I'm not asking for anything," he interrupted quickly. "I know this is complicated. I know you came here expecting to marry someone else and got me instead. I know I'm broken in ways that don't fully heal, but I wanted you to know how I feel. That's all." Clara thought about the letters from Elias Reed that had promised a life she'd never wanted anyway. Thought about the woman who'd stepped off that train expecting to trade one form of servitude for another. Thought about who she'd become in the dirt and sweat and relentless work of the past 2 years. "You're not broken," she said finally. "You're scarred. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. Broken things don't heal. Scars mean you survived something and came out the other side." Clara took a breath. "And for what it's worth, somewhere in the past 2 years of you driving me insane with your stubbornness, I started thinking maybe getting abandoned on that train platform was the best thing that ever happened to me." Wade's expression shifted. "Because it brought you here?" "Because it brought me to myself." Clara reached for his hand. The woman who got off that train was desperate for anyone to want her. The woman sitting here now doesn't need anyone to want her. But she's choosing you anyway. That's different. Wade's hand tightened on hers. "So what do we do about it?" "We keep working, keep building, keep showing this town that the people they threw away were worth more than they ever imagined." Clara smiled. "And maybe eventually we get married on this porch and dare anyone to say a word against it." "Eventually?" Wade's voice held laughter. "How long is eventually? However long it takes me to find a dress that doesn't have mud stains." Clara stood up and pulled Wade to his feet. "In the meantime, we have cattle to feed and fences to mend and a life to build." They married 6 months later, on the porch, just as Clara had predicted. Madame Lynn stood as witness, wearing her finest silk and crying more than Clara had ever seen her cry. The widow Chen brought half the town's supply of food. Even the banker showed up, looking uncomfortable but sincere in his congratulations. The preacher who'd told Clara to leave town performed the ceremony with visible reluctance, but he performed it. Clara figured that was close enough to an apology. There was no honeymoon, no time for grand romantic gestures. The day after the wedding, Clara and Wade were back to work, because that's what ranch life demanded. But in the evenings, they sat on the porch and talked about futures that felt possible instead of terrifying. 3 years after the wedding, they adopted a girl named Rosita from a Mexican family that had fallen on hard times. She was 6 years old, with Maria's dark eyes, and a wariness that Clara recognized from her own childhood. "You sure about this?" Wade asked the night before they brought Rosita home. "Taking on a child is different than taking on cattle." "I'm sure," Clara said. "Maria wanted children in this house. Let's give her that." Rosita was difficult at first. Suspicious of kindness, quick to anger, slow to trust. But Clara understood that language. She'd spoken it herself not that long ago. So she was patient when Rosita threw tantrums. Steady when Rosita tested boundaries. Present when Rosita finally broke down and admitted she was scared of being sent away. "We don't send family away," Clara told her, holding the sobbing child. "Not in this house. Not ever." It took 2 years for Rosita to stop flinching when Wade raised his voice. 3 years before she stopped hoarding food in her room. 4 years before she called them Mama and Papa without hesitation. But she did eventually. And Clara learned that sometimes healing takes longer than you expect, but it happens anyway if you're stubborn enough to wait. Madame Lynn died in her sleep at 78, leaving her restaurant to Clara and Wade with instructions to do something useful with it instead of letting it rot. They turned it into a boarding house for women traveling alone, women who needed a place that asked no questions and offered no judgment. The first woman who stayed there was a young widow from Louisiana with 2 children and nowhere to go. Clara gave her a room and a job and a chance to start over, just like Lynn had given her. On summer evenings, when the work was done and Rosita was asleep and the ranch was quiet, Clara and Wade would sit on the porch and watch the sunset over land they'd fought for. The land that had cost them everything and given them more than they'd known to want. "Do you ever think about that day at the train station?" Wade asked during one of those evenings. "Wonder what would have happened if Elias had actually married you?" Clara considered it. "Sometimes. But then I remember that the woman who got off that train was looking for someone to save her, and what she needed was to save herself." "You did save yourself," Wade said. "Saved me too while you were at it." "We saved each other? That's different." Clara leaned her head on Wade's shoulder. "Besides, if Elias had married me, I would have spent my whole life being grateful for scraps from a man who only valued me when I was convenient. This life? I earned every inch of it. Nobody can take that away." Wade kissed the top of her head. "No, no one can." Years later, long after Clara and Wade were gone, people in Dust Hollow still told the story of the Boston woman who got abandoned at the train station and refused to leave. They told their daughters and granddaughters about the woman who'd stood up to the most powerful man in town and won. They told anyone who'd listen about the Chinese widow who'd spent her life savings to save a friend's husband's ranch. The stories got embellished over time, of course. Some versions had Clara facing down Elias Reed with a rifle. Others had Madame Lynn bidding $10,000 at the auction. A few claimed Wade had been minutes from death when Clara arrived. But the truth was better than the stories. The truth was that 3 broken people, a dying rancher, a rejected mail-order bride, and a lonely widow, had found each other in the worst circumstances and built something that mattered. The truth was that sometimes the day the world throws you away is exactly the day you discover what you're capable of. That sometimes losing everything is the first step to finding what actually matters. That sometimes the people who seem broken are just people who haven't finished healing yet. And the truth was that Clara Whitmore Reed died at 83 years old in the ranch house she'd helped save, surrounded by children and grandchildren who'd never known a world where a woman couldn't speak her mind or fight her own battles or build her own future. Her last words were to her granddaughter, a fiery girl named Maria, who reminded everyone of the original. Clara took the girl's hand and said, "Never let anyone convince you that being abandoned means you're worthless. Sometimes it just means you are too big for the life they tried to squeeze you into." Then she closed her eyes and let go, secure in the knowledge that she'd lived exactly the life she'd fought for. Messy and imperfect and built on lies and truth in equal measure, but entirely, completely her own.